Story 1. The lighthouse on Blackshore Point had been abandoned for 42 years. But every 7 years, it turned on by itself. No electricity, no caretaker, no explanation, and every time its light returned, someone from the nearby coastal town vanished. Chapter 1. The Light That Shouldn't Exist. The storm arrived without warning. Wind screamed across the jagged cliffs of Blackshore Point. Crashing waves slammed against the rocks below, and rain fell sideways, erasing the horizon between ocean and sky. Detective Rowan Hale tightened her coat as she stepped out of her vehicle near the Blackshore police barricade. The air smelled of salt and wet stone. Emergency lights reflected off puddles scattered across the cracked coastal road. She had transferred to Blackshore only 3 weeks earlier, expecting quiet coastal cases, smuggling, theft, maybe the occasional missing tourist. Instead, she had arrived on the night the lighthouse turned on. Again, Detective Hale? She turned to see Sheriff Marcus Bell approaching. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried the exhaustion of someone who had seen the same nightmare too many times. "You picked a bad week to arrive," Bell said. Rowan glanced past him. There it stood, the Blackshore Lighthouse, perched at the edge of a jagged cliff like a skeletal finger pointing at the storm clouds. Its white stone tower was cracked, weathered, and partially collapsed near the top. The metal railings spiraling around its exterior had rusted away decades ago. But the light, the rotating beam of pale yellow illumination, sliced through the storm in perfect rhythm, sweeping across the ocean as if guided by an unseen keeper. Rowan frowned. "There's power running to it?" she asked. Bell shook his head slowly. "Power lines were cut in 1984, he said. "Generators removed. Wiring stripped. That tower hasn't had electricity in over 4 decades. Rowan watched the beam rotate again, illuminating the furious ocean. "Then how is it working?" Bell didn't answer immediately. Instead, he handed her a thin folder, its edges frayed with age. "Because every time that light turns on," he said quietly, "someone disappears." The pattern. They stood inside the sheriff's temporary command tent overlooking the cliffs. Officers moved nervously outside, radios crackling, search teams preparing boats despite the dangerous surf. Rowan flipped through the folder. 7 names were listed, 7 years apart. 1977, 1984, 1991, 1998, 2005, 2012, 2019. Each entry had one thing in common. No bodies, no suspects, no witnesses. And tonight marked the 7th year since the last disappearance. "You think someone's already missing?" Rowan asked. Bell nodded grimly. "Teenager named Lila Grant, 17. Last seen walking home from her shift at the Pier restaurant 3 hours ago." Rowan's chest tightened. "Security footage?" "Working on it," Bell said. "But there's something else." He pulled a photograph from the folder and placed it on the table. Rowan stared at it. It showed the lighthouse entrance, a massive iron door at the base of the tower. Painted on the door was a symbol, a spiral. But unlike typical spirals, this one had jagged, uneven edges, like it had been drawn by someone shaking. "When was this taken?" Rowan asked. "Tonight," Bell said. "The local legend." Thunder rattled the tent as Bell poured 2 cups of stale coffee. "You need to understand something," he said. "Blackshore doesn't just treat the lighthouse as abandoned." Rowan raised an eyebrow. "They treat it like it's cursed." Bell leaned against the table. "The lighthouse was built in 1893 after a cargo ship crashed into the reef and killed 30 sailors. For nearly 80 years, keepers lived there. Families rotated through shifts maintaining the light." "What happened in 1984? Rowan asked. Bell hesitated. "The last lighthouse keeper disappeared," he said. Rowan looked up sharply. "During a storm almost identical to tonight." The keeper's log. Bell reached into the folder again and pulled out a leather-bound notebook sealed inside plastic. "The last entry was written by Keeper Daniel Cross," Bell said. "Recovered inside the tower after he vanished." Rowan carefully opened the protective sleeve and read the final entry aloud. "The light has started moving on its own again. I tried shutting it down, but the machinery is cold, rusted, dead. And still it turns. I hear footsteps above the lantern room when no one is there. The ocean sounds wrong tonight. If the spiral returns, I must not follow the light." God help anyone who does. Rowan slowly lowered the journal. You said machinery was removed, she said. It was, Bell confirmed. And no one ever found Cross? No. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the lighthouse through the tent window. The beam rotated again. Steady. Precise. Alive. The first clue. A deputy rushed into the tent, soaked from the rain. Sheriff, we found something. Moments later, Rowan and Bell stood near the base of the cliff road overlooking the shoreline below. Rescue crews had gathered around something tangled in driftwood. A backpack. Bell zipped it open carefully. Inside were textbooks, a cracked phone, and a folded employee badge. Lila Grant. Blackshore Pier Restaurant. Rowan swallowed. She came this way, she said. One of the rescue divers approached. There's footprints leading toward the lighthouse trail, he said. But they stop halfway up the path. Stop? Rowan asked. The diver nodded, like she vanished mid-step. The trail. Ignoring Bell's warnings, Rowan insisted on walking the trail immediately. The storm intensified as they climbed the narrow stone path carved into the cliffside. Waves crashed violently below them, spraying cold mist high into the air. Rowan's flashlight beam bounced across the trail until she saw them. Footprints. Small. Barely visible in the mud. They led straight toward the lighthouse. Then suddenly, they stopped. Not faded. Not washed away. Stopped. Rowan crouched down, tracing the last visible impression in the mud. She was walking normally, she said. No signs of struggle. Bell shined his light around the area. There's nowhere to go. Cliff on one side, rock wall on the other. Rowan slowly stood. Unless she didn't leave, she said quietly. The door. They reached the lighthouse base minutes later. The iron door loomed above them, rusted and massive. Rainwater trickled down its surface, streaking the faded white paint. But the spiral symbol was fresh. Bright. Still dripping. Rowan touched it carefully. Paint. Still wet. Bell cursed under his breath. No one's been inside that tower since 1984, he said. Rowan pointed toward the rotating beam above them. Then someone is inside now. Thunder exploded overhead. The lighthouse light rotated, sweeping directly over them, bathing the doorway in pale yellow glow. For a brief moment, Rowan thought she saw a silhouette moving behind the cracked lantern glass far above. Watching them. The decision. Bell grabbed Rowan's arm. We wait for backup, he said firmly. Rowan stared at the iron door. Sheriff, if Lila's inside, she doesn't have time. Bell hesitated, conflict flashing across his face. Another thunderclap shook the cliffs. The lighthouse beam rotated again. Closer. Slower. Like it was tracking them. Rowan reached toward the rusted handle. Bell inhaled sharply. Detective, people who enter that lighthouse during the light cycle don't come back. Rowan tightened her grip. Then it's about time someone does. She pulled the door open. It groaned loudly, echoing into the darkness beyond. The smell hit them instantly. Salt water. Rot. And something metallic, like rusted blood. Inside, a spiral staircase wound upward into darkness, illuminated only by faint, flickering reflections of the rotating beam above. Rowan stepped forward. Behind her, the lighthouse door slammed shut on its own. Bell spun around, grabbing the handle. It wouldn't budge. From somewhere deep inside the tower, a faint voice echoed downward. A girl's voice. Help me. Rowan and Bell exchanged a horrified glance. Then the light above them suddenly stopped rotating. For 3 seconds, everything went completely dark, and when the beam resumed, it was facing directly downward, shining straight at them. The beam of the lighthouse burned downward like a spotlight from another world, trapping Rowan Hale and Sheriff Marcus Bell in its pale glow. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. The silence inside the tower felt unnatural, thick, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were listening. Then, from somewhere far above, the girl's voice echoed again. Please don't leave me here. Rowan's pulse hammered against her ribs. That was her, she whispered. That was Lila. Bell swallowed hard. Sound carries weird inside towers. Could be wind. Could be. That was her, Rowan repeated firmly. The beam above them resumed its slow rotation, sweeping shadows across the spiral staircase, winding upward through the tower's hollow center. The steps were rusted metal, slick with condensation and flecked with decades of salt corrosion. Rowan raised her flashlight. Only one way to find out. The spiral staircase. Each step groaned under their weight as they began climbing. The air inside the lighthouse was colder than outside, heavy with the scent of mildew and ocean decay. Their boots echoed against the hollow metal, sending hollow vibrations spiraling upward into darkness. Rowan kept her light trained ahead, but her eyes kept drifting toward the center of the staircase shaft. The inside of the tower was enormous. Old iron beams crisscrossed the hollow core, forming skeletal supports that disappeared into shadow above. Faint streaks of light flickered through broken stone panels, revealing long streaks of black residue running down the walls. Water damage? Rowan asked quietly. Bell shook his head slowly. That's not water. Rowan shined her flashlight closer. The streaks weren't uniform. They looked like something had been dragged downward repeatedly, over many years. She forced herself to keep climbing. The first landing. After 3 flights, they reached a circular landing. Old equipment rooms lined the walls, doors hanging crookedly from rusted hinges. Rowan pushed one open cautiously. Inside sat what remained of the lighthouse generator room. Or what had been the generator room. The floor was covered in stripped wires, shattered battery casings, and mechanical components removed decades ago. The metal housing where the generator once sat was hollow, empty except for thick dust and bird nests. Bell crossed his arms. County removed everything in '84, he said. Made sure nobody could ever restart the light. Rowan slowly turned in place, scanning the room. Then why does it still feel operational? Bell didn't answer. Because it did. Despite the decay, despite the absence of machinery, there was a low humming vibration pulsing faintly through the floor beneath their feet. Not loud, not mechanical, almost organic. Rowan crouched, pressing her palm against the cold metal floor. She felt it clearly now. A slow, rhythmic vibration, like a heartbeat. The walls. Bell's flashlight caught something scratched into the wall beside the doorway. Rowan stepped closer. Lines. Hundreds of them. Vertical tally marks carved deeply into the stone, stacked in uneven clusters that filled the entire wall surface. Those weren't here before, Bell muttered. Rowan counted quickly. Rows and rows of them. Far too many to be simple maintenance logs. These aren't tallies, she said quietly. They're days. Bell's jaw tightened. You're saying someone lived up here? Rowan nodded slowly. For a very long time. The keeper's quarters. They continued climbing. The storm outside roared louder as they ascended, wind howling through cracked windows and broken stone vents. The staircase narrowed slightly, forcing them closer to the inner wall. Another landing appeared above them. Bell hesitated when he saw the door there. It was different from the others. Reinforced. Locked from the outside with a heavy chain, though the padlock hung broken and twisted as if it had been torn apart by force. Rowan exchanged a glance with Bell before pushing the door open. The room inside was disturbingly preserved. This had once been the lighthouse keeper's living quarters. A narrow bed still sat against one wall, its mattress collapsed but intact. A small wooden desk stood near a shattered window, papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Rowan stepped carefully inside. Everything smelled stale, untouched. Except for one thing. The bed. The blanket was folded neatly. Too neatly. Like someone had done it recently. The hidden drawer. Bell moved toward the desk, sweeping debris aside. The drawer was jammed, but after a firm tug, it slid open with a metallic screech. Inside sat several weathered notebooks tied together with twine. Rowan immediately recognized the handwriting when she opened the first one. Daniel Cross, the final lighthouse keeper. She flipped to a marked page. Day 19. The light activated again tonight. I shut down every remaining system. Still it rotates. Still it calls. I hear movement below the stairs when the beam passes over the ocean. Rowan turned another page. Day 27. I found scratches appearing on the inner walls. I did not make them. I am certain of this. Another page. Day 31. The spiral appeared today, painted on the inside of the lantern room glass. I scrubbed it away. It returned within minutes. Rowan felt her stomach tighten. Bell leaned closer as she turned to the final entry. Day 42. The voice is louder now. It says the light does not guide ships. It guides offerings. I locked the lantern room door. If someone finds this, do not let the light complete its full rotation during a storm. Rowan froze. Belle read over her shoulder. Complete rotation? He asked. Rowan looked up toward the tower ceiling where the beam continued to sweep overhead. How long is a full cycle? She asked. Belle checked his watch. Roughly every 90 seconds. Rowan's voice dropped. Then we don't have much time. The moving light. Suddenly, the beam overhead stuttered. Once. Twice. Then it slowed. The rotation dragging unnaturally, as if something heavy resisted it from above. The girl's voice echoed again. Closer this time. Help me, it's dark up here. Belle grabbed his radio. Dispatch, do you copy? Only static answered. Rowan grabbed her flashlight tighter. We need to reach the lantern room now. The upper spiral. The final staircase section was steeper, narrower, and dangerously unstable. Sections of railing had completely rusted away, leaving only open air between them and the hollow tower core. The humming vibration beneath their feet grew stronger with each step. The light overhead flickered violently now. Flash. Darkness. Flash again. Rowan's breathing became shallow. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving inside the tower walls alongside them. Climbing with them. The lantern room door. At last, they reached the final landing. The lantern room door stood directly ahead, thick glass panels set into an iron frame, reinforced with internal locking bars. Except, the bars were bent outward. From the inside, Belle cursed softly. That's not possible. Rowan stepped closer. Through the cracked glass, she could see the enormous lighthouse lens rotating slowly, a massive multi-panel Fresnel lens that should have weighed thousands of pounds. It spun effortlessly, without gears, without motors, without sound, and inside the lantern room, someone stood near the center. A silhouette, small, still. Rowan's voice cracked. Lila? The silhouette shifted slightly. The lighthouse beam passed across the glass again, illuminating the figure clearly. It was Lila Grant, her face pale, eyes wide, but something was wrong. She wasn't looking at them. She was staring directly into the rotating lens, like she was mesmerized. The secret beneath the lens. Rowan shoved the lantern door open. The wind howled violently inside the glass chamber, swirling salt spray and dust into a chaotic storm around the rotating lens. Lila! Rowan shouted, rushing forward. The girl didn't respond. Belle grabbed her shoulder, trying to pull her away from the lens. The moment he touched her, the floor beneath the lens shifted. A hidden hatch slid open with a grinding metallic groan, revealing a spiral staircase descending downward. Into pitch blackness. Cold air rushed upward from the opening, carrying the overwhelming smell of seawater and decay. Lila suddenly whispered, her voice hollow. It's not the top. Rowan leaned closer. What do you mean? Lila slowly turned her head toward her, eyes glassy and unfocused. The lighthouse goes down too. The rotating beam suddenly accelerated, spinning wildly around the lantern room. The vibration beneath their feet intensified into violent shaking. Belle grabbed Rowan's arm. The structure's destabilizing. Below them, the hidden staircase pulsed with faint yellow light, as if the beam was reflecting upward from somewhere deep underground. And from that darkness below, multiple voices began whispering in unison, calling Lila's name. The storm arrived without warning. By dawn, Greyhaven's harbor had transformed into a violent, steel-colored battlefield. Waves slammed against the seawall, spraying salt water over the rusted railings and soaking the abandoned fishing crates that lined the docks. The lighthouse beam, still functioning despite decades of neglect, sliced through the fog like a trembling blade, its light intermittently swallowed by sheets of rain. Detective Lena Mercer stood beneath the overhang of the harbor master's abandoned office, her coat pulled tightly around her shoulders as she stared toward Blackthorn Lighthouse. Behind her, Officer Daniel Reeves adjusted his soaked notebook, shielding it from the wind. You picked one hell of a day to go exploring underwater tunnels, Reeves muttered. Mercer didn't respond immediately. Her eyes remained locked on the lighthouse. Storms like this, she finally said, are why the tunnels exist. Reeves frowned. You think the victims were moved during storms? Mercer nodded slowly. Storm noise covers movement. Floodwater hides footprints. And if you're using underwater passages, storms are the perfect camouflage. Reeves flipped through his notes. Still can't believe that staircase exists. A lighthouse with a hidden descent into the sea. That sounds like folklore. It was folklore, Mercer said quietly, until 3 bodies proved otherwise. The autopsy revelation. They had spent the previous night reviewing the autopsy reports from the remains discovered in the submerged chamber beneath the lighthouse. Dr. Harland, Greyhaven's aging medical examiner, had called Mercer at 3:17 a.m. with findings he described as unsettlingly deliberate. Inside the morgue, hours earlier, Harland had placed photographs across the steel examination table. All 3 victims, he said, tapping the photos, were killed within minutes of each other. Clean incisions across the carotid artery. No defensive wounds. Reeves leaned forward. Sedated? Harland nodded grimly. Yes, but here's the disturbing part. He slid over toxicology reports. Each victim was sedated with different compounds. One with benzodiazepines. One with veterinary tranquilizers. One with scopolamine. Mercer raised an eyebrow. Why use 3 different methods? Harland exhaled slowly. Because whoever did this wanted to demonstrate control, knowledge, and adaptability. He hesitated before adding, "There's more." He handed Mercer a high-resolution image taken during internal examination. Inside each victim's rib cage, etched directly onto the sternum bone, was the same symbol. A spiral intersected by 3 vertical lines. The same mark they had found carved into the lighthouse staircase door. The ledger clue. Now, as rain battered the harbor windows, Mercer spread the photographs across a plastic crate while Reeves leaned closer. 3 lines through the spiral, Reeves said. We thought the spiral symbolized the network. What do the lines mean? Mercer didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her evidence satchel and removed the water-damaged notebook recovered from the submerged chamber. The pages had been painstakingly dried overnight by forensic technicians using low-heat preservation methods. Most of the text remained illegible, smeared into dark watercolor stains. But several entries had survived. Mercer opened to one of the deciphered pages. Reeves read aloud. 3 currents guide the tide. 3 keepers record the ledger. When the spiral completes its 3rd turn, the sea collects its due. He blinked. That sounds like ritual language. Mercer nodded. It is. She flipped another page. Each keeper records sacrifices in the drowned ledger. When one keeper falls, another rises. The ledger must never be lost. Reeves swallowed. You think someone else is maintaining this ledger? Mercer closed the notebook slowly. I think someone is ensuring this operation never ends. The survivor. At 10:42 a.m., Mercer's phone vibrated. It was Dr. Harland again. You need to come to the hospital, he said. Immediately. Greyhaven General Hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic and ocean salt. An unavoidable side effect of being located just 2 blocks from the shoreline. Harland met them outside an isolation room. I didn't want to call until I was certain, he said, lowering his voice. But we have a survivor. Reeves stiffened. From the lighthouse? Harland nodded. She was admitted 2 days ago after being found unconscious near the northern breakwater. Severe hypothermia. No identification. She regained consciousness this morning. Mercer's pulse quickened. Does she remember anything? Harland hesitated. She remembers too much. Inside the dim hospital room, a woman in her early 30s sat upright in bed. Her skin remained pale, her lips cracked from dehydration, but her eyes were sharp and alert. A nurse quietly exited as Mercer and Reeves entered. I'm Detective Mercer, Lena said gently. This is Officer Reeves. We understand you may have information about what happened to you. The woman studied them carefully before speaking. My name is Alina Shaw. Her voice trembled slightly. And I know why they tried to drown me. Mercer pulled a chair closer. Tell me. Alina's fingers tightened around the hospital blanket. They thought I stole the ledger. Alina's story. Alina had been working as a maritime archivist for the Greyhaven Historical Society. Her job involved cataloging ship manifests, shipping routes, and lighthouse maintenance records dating back over 2 centuries. 3 months ago, she said, I discovered a sealed archive file labeled Lighthouse Operational Amendments, 1894. Reeves scribbled notes as she continued. The file contained references to a custodial order responsible for maintaining harbor safety during extreme storms. But the language was strange. It referenced sacrifices to calm the currents. Mercer leaned forward. Did you report it? Alina shook her head. I tried to verify it first. That's when I found the second file. Her eyes darkened. The drowned ledger. Mercer's stomach tightened. You found the actual ledger? Alina nodded weakly. It was hidden inside a sealed compartment beneath the archive floorboards. Wrapped in oilcloth. Bound in leather. Reeves whispered, What was inside it? Alina swallowed. Names. Hundreds of names. Dating back over 100 years. Mercer's chest tightened. Victims? Yes, Alina said. But not just victims. Each entry included 3 signatures. Mercer exchanged a glance with Reeves. 3 keepers, Mercer said quietly. Alina nodded. The night of the attack. Alina described how she had begun secretly photographing pages from the ledger. I planned to report it to federal authorities, she said. But someone found out. Her breathing quickened. I was leaving the archive building one night when a man approached me in the parking lot. He wore a fisherman's coat and gloves. He told me to return the ledger. Did you recognize him? Reeves asked. Alina shook her head. He said something else before he grabbed me. Mercer leaned closer. What? Alina's eyes filled with tears. He said, The sea doesn't forget its keepers. She paused, trembling. They drugged me. I woke up underwater, in that chamber beneath the lighthouse. Mercer's chest tightened as Alina continued. They forced me to watch as they prepared the others. They said I had broken the spiral, that I had to be erased from the ledger. Her voice cracked. But during the storm, something went wrong. The chamber flooded faster than they expected. I broke free and escaped through a collapsed tunnel. Reeves leaned forward urgently. Do you know who they were? Alina hesitated. I never saw their faces clearly, but I heard them arguing. Mercer's pulse quickened. What were they arguing about? Alina whispered. About the new keeper. The name. Mercer leaned forward. Did they say who the new keeper was? Alina nodded slowly. They called him the harbor master. Reeves blinked. Greyhaven doesn't have an official harbor master anymore. That position was dissolved 20 years ago. Mercer's mind raced. Not officially, she murmured. The abandoned office. Now, standing inside the very harbor master's abandoned office, overlooking the storm-ravaged harbor, Mercer ran her fingers across the dusty desk. Reeves shined his flashlight across the peeling walls. You think someone's still using this place? He asked. Mercer didn't answer. She had noticed something. A faint imprint in the dust. Recent. She crouched beside the desk and pulled open a drawer that had been sealed shut by corrosion. Reeves assisted, prying it open with a crowbar they found outside. Inside the drawer sat a small metal lockbox. Reeves raised an eyebrow. That doesn't look abandoned. Mercer pulled it out carefully. The lock had been recently scratched, signs of frequent use. Reeves cracked it open using his multi-tool. Inside, wrapped in waterproof plastic, was a thin notebook. Mercer opened it slowly. The first page contained a title written in precise, elegant handwriting. The Drowned Ledger, Continuation Record. Reeves inhaled sharply. They flipped through the pages. Names, dates, coordinates, and at the bottom of each entry, 3 signatures. But on the most recent page, only 2 signatures appeared. The third signature line remained blank. Below it was written, Keeper Ascension Pending. The photograph. Tucked into the final page of the ledger continuation was a photograph. Mercer pulled it free. It showed 3 individuals standing on the harbor pier during a storm nearly identical to the one raging outside now. Their faces were partially obscured by shadows and rain, but one figure stood clearly enough to identify. Reeves leaned closer. His face drained of color. Detective, that's... Mercer finished the sentence in a whisper. Mayor Aldridge. The siren. Outside, the storm intensified. Harbor sirens suddenly began blaring, long, wailing alerts signaling emergency tide levels. Mercer snapped the ledger shut. If Aldridge is one of the keepers, Reeves said, then he's been orchestrating this entire network from inside the town government. Mercer nodded. And if there are supposed to be 3 keepers? She stared at the blank signature line. Then someone is about to be promoted. Reeves swallowed. You think they're planning another sacrifice tonight? Mercer grabbed her coat and headed for the door. I don't think, she said grimly. I know. As they stepped outside into the storm, Mercer's phone buzzed again. It was Dr. Harland. She answered immediately. "Harland, what is it?" His voice trembled. "Mercer, Alina Shaw is gone." Mercer froze. "What do you mean gone?" "She disappeared from her hospital room 10 minutes ago," Harland said. "Security footage shows 2 individuals escorting her out, wearing paramedic uniforms." Mercer's pulse pounded. "Did they identify the ambulance?" "Yes," Harland said shakily. "But the vehicle number belongs to an ambulance that was decommissioned 15 years ago." Thunder cracked overhead as Mercer stared toward the lighthouse beam cutting through the storm. The spiral was turning again. And this time, it had taken their only witness. The storm swallowed Greyhaven whole. Rain hammered the town like falling glass, turning streets into rivers and forcing storefront owners to board their windows against the violent coastal wind. Emergency sirens wailed across the harbor as tidal surge warnings flashed across local broadcast channels, urging residents to stay indoors. But Detective Lena Mercer wasn't inside. She stood at the edge of the marina parking lot, rain soaking through her coat as she stared at the tire tracks cutting through pooled seawater. The tracks were fresh, carved sharply into the mud, and leading toward the abandoned shipping yards along the northern docks. Behind her, Officer Daniel Reeves slammed the cruiser door and jogged toward her, clutching a tablet displaying hospital security footage. "They left the hospital at 11:06, Reeves said, breathless. "Ambulance cameras caught them heading north, not toward any active emergency facility." Mercer nodded toward the tire tracks. "They're heading for the industrial docks." Reeves squinted through the rain. "Why there?" Mercer's jaw tightened. "Because that's where Greyhaven hides everything it doesn't want found." The storm pattern. Inside the cruiser, windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the torrential downpour as Mercer navigated through partially flooded streets. Reeves studied the tablet screen, replaying emergency weather data. "Storm intensity is escalating faster than predicted," he said. "Tide surge expected to peak in 2 hours." Mercer's hands tightened on the steering wheel. 2 hours, she repeated. "Enough time for a ritual." Reeves glanced at her. "You really think they're planning one tonight?" Mercer reached into her coat and pulled out the continuation ledger they had recovered from the harbor master's office. She flipped to the last page and tapped a set of coordinates scribbled beneath the unfinished signature. "These coordinates match Warehouse Pier 9, she said. Reeves frowned. "That pier collapsed during the hurricane 15 years ago." "Exactly," Mercer replied, "which makes it perfect for something no one is supposed to witness. The mayor's disappearance." Mercer's phone buzzed again as they turned onto Dockside Boulevard. She answered without taking her eyes off the road. "Mercer." It was Police Chief Dalton. "Where are you?" Dalton demanded. "Following a lead connected to Alina Shaw's abduction," Mercer said. Dalton hesitated before speaking again. "You need to return to the station immediately." Mercer's pulse quickened. "Why?" There was a pause. "Mayor Aldridge is missing." Reeves turned sharply toward Mercer. Dalton continued, his voice low and strained. "He left his office during the evacuation procedures about 30 minutes ago. Security cameras show him exiting through a restricted maintenance stairwell. His driver found his vehicle abandoned near the harbor." Mercer tightened her grip on the wheel. "We know where he is," she said quietly. "Pier 9. Warehouse Pier 9 stood like a skeletal monument at the far edge of Greyhaven's industrial district. Rusted steel beams jutted into the storm-dark sky, while broken concrete slabs dangled over churning black water below. Floodlights flickered intermittently across the dock, powered by a portable generator station near the entrance. Mercer killed the cruiser's headlights 2 blocks away. They approached on foot, keeping low behind abandoned shipping containers as wind howled through the metal corridors. Reeves adjusted his sidearm. "You see any movement?" Mercer nodded toward the pier entrance. 2 figures stood beneath the flickering floodlight, both wearing yellow storm slickers and medical masks. "Paramedic disguises," Reeves whispered. Mercer's eyes scanned beyond them. Through the rain and mist, she spotted the silhouette of an ambulance parked near the collapsed loading ramp. "They're here," she said. "The ritual platform." They circled the dock quietly, slipping between cargo crates and rusted forklifts until they reached a vantage point overlooking the collapsed pier platform. What Mercer saw made her stomach twist. A temporary stage had been assembled from reinforced steel scaffolding extending over the open water. Thick ropes and pulleys hung from overhead beams, swaying violently in the storm wind. At the center of the platform stood 3 figures. One was bound to a vertical support column. Alina Shaw. Her head hung forward, soaked hair plastered across her face as storm water dripped from her clothes. Beside her stood 2 individuals dressed in black waterproof coats, their faces hidden beneath hoods. And standing between them, Mayor Victor Aldridge. He held a leather-bound book in his gloved hands. The original Drown Ledger. The ceremony begins. Mercer motioned for Reeves to stay low as they inched closer, hiding behind stacked shipping pallets. Aldridge's voice carried through the storm, amplified by a portable speaker system crackling against the wind. "The spiral continues," he declared. "The currents demand balance. The ledger demands closure." One of the hooded figures stepped forward, producing a ceremonial knife with a curved silver blade. Reeves swallowed hard. "They're going to kill her." Mercer's mind raced as she scanned the platform. For additional guards patrolled the perimeter, each armed with harpoon guns modified into close-range projectile weapons. Storm waves slammed violently against the pier supports below, spraying seawater across the structure. Mercer checked her watch. 47 minutes until peak tide surge. "They're timing it with the flood," she whispered. "The water will erase everything." The third keeper. As Aldridge raised the ledger, he turned toward the second hooded figure. "Step forward," he commanded. The figure removed their hood. Reeves inhaled sharply. "Chief Dalton." Mercer's blood ran cold. Police Chief Harold Dalton stepped into the stormlight, his expression calm and resolute. "I accepted this role 20 years ago," Dalton said. "Greyhaven survives because of what we maintain." Mercer felt a wave of betrayal slam through her chest. Dalton continued. "When the storms grow stronger, sacrifices ensure the harbor remains open. The town prospers because we protect it." Aldridge nodded solemnly. "And tonight," the mayor said, "you will complete your ascension as the third keeper." Dalton turned toward Alina, lifting the ceremonial blade. "Mercer moves." Mercer raised her weapon, adrenaline flooding her veins. "We take Dalton first," she whispered to Reeves. "If he completes the ritual, Alina dies." Reeves nodded, steadying his aim. Lightning flashed across the sky. Mercer fired. The bullet struck Dalton's shoulder, spinning him backward as the ceremonial knife clattered across the platform. Chaos erupted instantly. Guards shouted, raising their weapons as Mercer and Reeves sprinted from cover, firing controlled shots toward the scaffolding supports and floodlights, plunging sections of the pier into darkness. Aldridge stumbled backward, clutching the ledger as he barked orders. "Secure the witness. Complete the harvest." The battle on the pier. Rain and gunfire merged into a deafening roar. Reeves dropped one guard with a precise shot to the leg, sending him crashing into a crate. Mercer vaulted onto the platform ladder, climbing toward Alina as waves smashed against the pier supports below. Dalton, bleeding but conscious, grabbed a backup weapon from beneath his coat. "You don't understand," he shouted, firing toward Mercer. "This keeps the town alive." Mercer ducked behind a steel beam as bullets ricocheted off the scaffolding. "By murdering innocent people?" she shouted back. Dalton's voice cracked with fury. "They aren't innocent. The ledger selects those whose deaths prevent greater catastrophe." Mercer surged forward, tackling him as another lightning bolt split the sky overhead. The two slammed into the rain-slicked platform, Dalton struggling to reach his weapon. Mercer pinned him, pressing her gun against his chest. "It's over, Chief." Dalton stared up at her with hollow eyes. "The storm doesn't end," he whispered. "It only changes direction." Aldridge's escape. Behind them, Aldridge bolted toward the ambulance, clutching the ledger tightly. Reeves spotted him and fired, shattering the vehicle's rear window, but Aldridge dove into the driver's seat and sped toward the far end of the dock where a cargo ramp descended toward the flooded access road. "Mercer!" Reeves shouted. "He's getting away with the ledger." Mercer hesitated only a fraction of a second before turning back toward Alina. Rescuing the witness came first. The collapse. Mercer reached Alina and cut through the restraints as the storm intensified to hurricane-level winds. The entire scaffolding structure groaned violently under the pressure of crashing waves. Reeves shouted from below. "The tide surge is hitting early. The pier's giving out." Metal beams began snapping beneath them as water surged across the platform. Mercer slung Alina's arm over her shoulder and guided her toward the ladder as the structure tilted dangerously toward the ocean. Dalton, still bleeding heavily, crawled toward the edge of the platform, staring out at the raging sea. "You've broken the spiral," he murmured. The scaffolding collapsed seconds later. Mercer and Alina barely reached solid dock ground as the ritual platform shattered and plunged into the storming water below, dragging Dalton and several guards into the black ocean depths. The storm harvest fails. Emergency sirens echoed across the harbor as rescue crews arrived moments later, pulling injured guards from the dock and securing the area. Reeves helped Mercer guide Alina toward an ambulance. "Dalton's gone," Reeves said quietly. Mercer nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon where Aldridge's stolen ambulance had vanished into the storm. "He still has the ledger," she said. Alina clutched Mercer's arm weakly. "There's another record," she whispered. Mercer turned sharply. "What do you mean?" Alina's voice trembled. "The drowned ledger was only the master copy. Each keeper maintains a secondary archive, hidden somewhere tied to their personal history." Reeves frowned. "You think Aldridge has one?" Alina nodded. "He kept referencing a place during the ritual preparations." Mercer leaned closer. "Where?" Alina swallowed. "The Tide Orphanage." "The next target." Mercer's heart skipped. The Tide Orphanage had closed decades earlier after a suspicious fire destroyed half the building and displaced dozens of children. Reeves stared at her. "That place has been abandoned since the 1980s. Mercer shook her head slowly. "Not abandoned," she said. "Hidden." Thunder rolled across the sky as rescue lights illuminated the flooded docks. Mercer stared into the storm-dark horizon, knowing Aldridge was already moving to protect whatever secrets remained in the orphanage ruins. The spiral hadn't ended. It had only shifted. And now, the storm had revealed something far worse than ritual murder. It had exposed a legacy built on generations of stolen lives. The storm still raged when Detective Lena Mercer returned to Greyhaven's northern shoreline. But the ocean had begun to change. The towering waves that had battered the docks only hours earlier were receding, retreating like something satisfied or temporarily appeased. The wind still howled across the cliffs, dragging sea mist through the skeletal remains of abandoned coastal structures. And standing alone above the jagged shoreline, barely visible through thick fog and rain, was the Tide Orphanage. Reeves parked the cruiser at the base of the cracked service road leading up the hill. The building loomed above them, half burned, half collapsed, its blackened stone walls rising like the remains of a drowned cathedral. Mercer stared at it silently. "How many kids lived here?" Reeves asked. Mercer exhaled slowly. "Officially, 32. She stepped out into the cold rain. "Unofficially, we don't know." The forgotten fire. The orphanage fire had happened 38 years earlier. Official records blamed faulty electrical wiring and outdated infrastructure. Several staff members survived. Most of the children were listed as relocated to other foster programs across the state. But Mercer had spent the last 2 hours reviewing archived emergency logs recovered from the Greyhaven Historical Registry, and something had stood out immediately. Only 17 relocation records existed. That left 15 children unaccounted for. Reeves slammed the cruiser door shut behind him. "Town said they all got transferred." Mercer nodded toward the orphanage. "The town says a lot of things." Inside the ruins, the main entrance doors hung from warped hinges, swaying slightly in the storm wind. The smell of mold, smoke residue, and saltwater decay hit them immediately as they stepped inside. Mercer raised her flashlight, sweeping across the entry hall. Peeling wallpaper hung in damp strips from cracked plaster walls. Charred wooden beams jutted from the collapsed ceiling overhead. Rainwater dripped steadily through shattered skylights, forming puddles across the warped tile floor. But despite the destruction, there were footprints. Fresh ones, leading deeper inside. Reeves crouched to examine them. 2 adults, one dragging something heavy. Mercer followed the trail. Or someone unconscious. The children's wing. They moved cautiously through a corridor lined with small dormitory rooms, each door marked with faded hand-painted names still barely visible beneath soot stains. Mercer paused beside one doorway. Inside, rusted bed frames stood crooked against the walls. Burned mattresses had collapsed into skeletal springs, but scattered across the floor were fragments of melted plastic toys and small shoes frozen in blackened puddles of fire damage. Mercer knelt slowly, picking up a half-melted music box shaped like a lighthouse. She turned it gently. The broken mechanism wheezed, producing only distorted metallic clicks. Reeves stood in the doorway behind her. "You think Aldridge kept records here?" Mercer stood, staring around the room. "No," she said quietly. "I think he kept memories. The underground passage. The footprints led them toward the rear of the building where the fire damage grew less severe. The walls here remained mostly intact, though thick water stains spread across the ceiling like branching veins. At the end of the hallway stood a reinforced steel door. It had been hidden behind a collapsed storage shelf. Mercer pushed debris aside, revealing a rusted handle and a keypad lock long since corroded beyond function. Reeves raised his weapon instinctively as Mercer forced the door open with a crowbar from the maintenance room nearby. The door screeched open, revealing a narrow concrete staircase descending underground. Cold air surged upward from below, thick with the smell of seawater and rot. Reeves swallowed. Why would an orphanage have a basement like that? Mercer stepped toward the darkness. Because this wasn't just an orphanage. The tide tunnels. The staircase descended nearly 40 feet beneath the building before opening into a vast underground chamber carved directly into the coastal bedrock. Mercer's flashlight beam swept across the cavern, revealing reinforced concrete walls and rows of rusted iron cages bolted to the floor. Reeves froze. Jesus! Each cage was small, child-sized. Mercer's chest tightened painfully as she stepped deeper into the chamber. Water pooled across the floor, reflecting the beam of her flashlight in trembling patterns that made the entire room appear to ripple like a submerged graveyard. And carved into the far wall, the spiral symbol. But this one was older, far older. Its edges had been chiseled into the stone itself rather than painted or scratched. The Keeper Nursery. Reeves moved slowly between the cages, his voice barely above a whisper. This wasn't containment. Mercer nodded grimly. This was selection. A row of metal filing cabinets stood against the far wall, partially submerged in shallow seawater. Mercer forced one open, ignoring the rust slicing into her gloves as she pulled out soaked folders one by one. Each file contained a child's name, age, medical records, psychological evaluations, and at the bottom of every file, a single handwritten word, candidate. Mercer flipped through file after file, her breathing growing shallow as she read birth dates and intake reports. These kids weren't abandoned, she said. They were chosen. The ritual training. Reeves discovered a second chamber beyond the cages, a circular room lined with broken chairs arranged in a spiral pattern, facing a raised stone platform in the center. On the platform sat an iron restraint chair bolted directly into the stone floor. Mercer's stomach twisted. "Dear God," Reeves pointed toward the wall. Painted across it in faded yellow lettering were instructional phrases written at child height. "The ocean listens. The spiral chooses. Only the worthy return." Mercer stepped closer, tracing her fingers across the crumbling paint. "They trained them," she whispered. "They were raising the next generation of keepers." Aldridge's archive. Footsteps echoed faintly from deeper within the tunnels. Mercer raised her weapon instantly, signaling Reeves to move silently beside her. They followed the sound through a narrow stone corridor where emergency lanterns flickered weakly along the walls, recently lit. At the corridor's end stood a heavy reinforced vault door, partially open. Inside, floodlights illuminated shelves stacked with meticulously preserved records, photographs, and ledgers dating back nearly a century. Mayor Victor Aldridge stood at the center of the room, hastily stuffing documents into waterproof storage cases. He turned slowly as Mercer and Reeves entered. His expression was calm, almost relieved. "I wondered how long it would take you to find the truth," he said quietly. The mayor's revelation. Mercer kept her weapon trained on him. "It ends tonight, Aldridge." He smiled faintly. "You misunderstand, Detective. This is where it begins." He gestured around the archive. Greyhaven was built on maritime trade routes cursed by catastrophic storms long before modern records existed. Generations ago, the founders discovered something buried beneath these cliffs, tidal chambers that amplify atmospheric pressure anomalies. Reeves frowned. "You're saying storms are predictable?" "Controllable," Aldridge corrected. but only when balance is maintained. Mercer stepped forward. You've been murdering children for balance? Aldridge's expression hardened. We raised protectors. Those who survived the spiral training became keepers who monitored oceanic patterns and prevented disasters that would have wiped Greyhaven off the map decades ago. Mercer's voice trembled with fury. And the ones who didn't survive? Aldridge hesitated. They became part of the tide's memory. The final escape attempt. Sirens echoed faintly above as emergency crews finally reached the orphanage ruins. Aldridge glanced toward the ceiling. They're early, he murmured. He slammed a detonator switch mounted on the archive desk. Warning alarms blared instantly as red emergency lights flooded the tunnels. Reeves cursed. He's rigged the place. Aldridge grabbed the waterproof storage case and sprinted toward a secondary tunnel exit. Mercer fired, the bullet shattering the case's handle, but failing to stop him as he disappeared into the darkness. Go! Mercer shouted, chasing after him. The rising tide. Water began surging through the tunnels as hidden floodgates opened, sending seawater rushing into the underground chambers with violent force. Reeves grabbed Mercer's arm. The whole structure is flooding. Mercer stared into the dark tunnel where Aldridge had vanished. If he escaped with those records, the Keeper network could rebuild itself anywhere. She pulled free. Then we finish this before the tide takes everything. They sprinted into the collapsing tunnel, the roar of incoming seawater echoing behind them like a rising wall of death. Ahead, Aldridge's flashlight beam flickered through the darkness as he raced toward the hidden coastal exit. The final archive. The last surviving record of Greyhaven's generational conspiracy, and the only evidence that could destroy it forever. The tidal tunnels were dying. Seawater roared through the collapsing passageways beneath the Tide orphanage, smashing against concrete supports and ripping loose decades-old wiring that sparked violently as it submerged. Emergency lights flickered erratically, casting strobes of crimson and darkness that made the tunnels feel like a collapsing heartbeat beneath Greyhaven's cliffs. Detective Lena Mercer sprinted through the narrowing corridor, her boots splashing through rapidly rising water. Behind her, Officer Daniel Reeves fought to keep pace, his flashlight beam slicing wildly through swirling mist and falling debris. Ahead, Mayor Victor Aldridge's silhouette flickered at the end of the tunnel, barely visible through the chaotic storm of dust, water, and flashing emergency lights. He's heading toward the sea exit, Reeves shouted over the thunderous roar of rushing water. Mercer pushed harder. If he reaches open coastline, he disappears forever. The Founder's Tunnel. The tunnel curved sharply downward, carved deeper into the bedrock beneath Greyhaven's shoreline. The walls here were older than anything they had seen before, rough-hewn stone reinforced with rusted iron beams that looked centuries old. Symbols covered the walls, spirals layered over spirals, etched deeply into the rock, overlapping in generations of carving that stretched into darkness beyond Mercer's flashlight beam. This section wasn't built by the orphanage, Reeves said breathlessly. Mercer nodded. This was here long before it. Lightning cracked somewhere above the cliffs, sending tremors through the tunnel ceiling. Loose stones rained down as seawater surged higher around their knees. Mercer's radio crackled faintly. Mercer, report. Chief Dispatcher Harlan's voice struggled through heavy static. We're in the orphanage tunnels, Mercer yelled back. Entire structure is flooding. Aldridge is escaping through coastal passageways. The radio fizzled out again. Communication was gone. They were alone. The Founder's chamber. The tunnel suddenly opened into a massive cavern carved directly into the cliff's interior. Mercer froze. The chamber was enormous, easily the size of a cathedral. Massive stone pillars rose from the ocean floor below, supporting the ceiling above like the ribs of some ancient skeletal creature. In the center stood a circular stone platform, surrounded by black seawater that surged violently against its edges. Ancient lanterns hung along the cavern walls, flickering with eerie green flames that somehow remained lit despite the flooding chamber. Reeves whispered in disbelief. What is this place? Mercer stepped cautiously onto the platform. This is where it started. Carved into the stone floor beneath her boots was the largest spiral symbol they had encountered yet, its edges filled with grooves that allowed seawater to flow through it like veins feeding a living organism. And standing at the center of that spiral was Aldridge, the last keeper. He held the waterproof archive case clutched tightly to his chest as waves crashed violently around the platform. His rain-soaked suit clung to him as his gray hair whipped wildly in the cavern wind. He looked exhausted, desperate, but resolute. "You followed faster than I expected," Aldridge said quietly as Mercer and Reeves approached, weapons drawn. "It's over," Mercer said. Aldridge shook his head slowly. "No, it ends here." He gestured toward the massive spiral beneath their feet. "This chamber predates Greyhaven itself. The town founders discovered it 200 years ago after a storm collapsed the cliffs and exposed the entrance." Reeves scoffed. "And they decided child sacrifice was the solution?" Aldridge's eyes darkened. "They discovered the storms followed patterns, unnatural ones. Entire fleets vanished without warning. Entire shorelines flooded overnight. This chamber allowed them to predict tidal catastrophes weeks in advance." Mercer narrowed her eyes. "Prediction doesn't require murder." Aldridge's voice cracked slightly. "No, but control does. The Keeper ritual." He slowly opened the archive case, revealing dozens of preserved ledgers inside. "These contain 2 centuries of tidal anomaly data," he said. "Without them, Greyhaven becomes blind. The storms will return stronger than ever." Mercer stepped closer. "You're lying to justify genocide." Aldridge laughed bitterly. "You think I enjoy this?" He pointed toward the spiral grooves beneath them as seawater surged through them in rhythmic pulses. "This chamber responds to atmospheric pressure shifts and oceanic gravitational currents. The Keepers were trained to interpret these responses. Each ritual synchronized human neurological patterns with tidal resonance signals." Reeves blinked. "You're saying you used brainwave conditioning to read ocean patterns?" "Yes," Aldridge said quietly. "Only a few children survived the psychological training. Those who did became Keepers who saved thousands of lives across generations." Mercer's voice hardened. "And the rest?" Aldridge stared down at the spiral as waves lapped against his shoes. "They became calibration variables. The flood begins." A thunderous crack echoed through the cavern as one of the supporting pillars fractured under pressure. The chamber floor trembled violently, sending seawater flooding higher across the spiral platform. Reeves shouted, "The whole cave is collapsing." Mercer kept her weapon locked on Aldridge. "Drop the archive." Aldridge shook his head. "If these records disappear, the storms will devour Greyhaven within decades." Mercer stepped forward slowly. "Then we learn to survive without murder." Aldridge's expression softened, almost sorrowful. "You truly believe humanity learns from its sins?" Mercer didn't respond. "The Keeper's confession." Aldridge's voice lowered as he stared into the rising tide around them. "I was one of them, Detective." Mercer's breath caught. "I survived the orphanage training," he continued quietly. "I became Keeper after my predecessor drowned during a tidal surge in 1994. Reeves glanced at Mercer in shock. Aldridge met her gaze. "I have spent 30 years preventing disasters this town will never know existed. Entire shipping routes redirected. Entire hurricanes mitigated through predictive evacuation modeling." Mercer's voice trembled slightly. "You could have used science. Weather satellites. Oceanographic institutes." Aldridge gave a tired smile. "You think they would have listened to a small coastal town claiming storms followed supernatural tidal resonance patterns?" He stepped backward toward the cavern edge. "The spiral works, Detective. It always has. The final choice." Mercer advanced carefully as water surged to their waists. "You don't get to decide who dies for your theories," she said. Aldridge looked down at the ledgers, then back at her. "If I surrender these records, Greyhaven loses centuries of survival knowledge." Mercer nodded. "Then we build new knowledge. Without blood." The cavern ceiling groaned loudly as another pillar collapsed, sending debris crashing into the water behind them. Reeves shouted, "We have less than 2 minutes before this chamber floods completely." Aldridge closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he threw the archive case across the platform toward Mercer. It slid across the flooded stone floor and slammed against her boots. "The spiral ends with me," he said quietly. Before Mercer could react, Aldridge turned and sprinted toward the collapsing cavern edge. "Stop!" Mercer shouted, but he dove into the raging black water below. The tide swallowed him instantly. Escape from the spiral. The cavern ceiling began collapsing in sections as Mercer grabbed the archive case and turned toward Reeves. Tunnel exit, she shouted. They sprinted through the secondary passage Aldridge had used, racing against the rising floodwaters surging behind them like a living tsunami. Stone supports snapped and crumbled as seawater filled the tunnels completely. Reeves shoved open the emergency coastal hatch just as the water reached their chests. They burst onto the jagged shoreline outside as the orphanage cliffside collapsed behind them, sending tons of stone crashing into the ocean below. Mercer collapsed onto the wet sand, gasping for air as emergency helicopters roared overhead through the dying storm clouds. Reeves dropped beside her, staring back at the collapsing cliffs. "It's over," he whispered. Mercer clutched the archive case tightly. "No," she said quietly. "Now it really begins." The Keeper network exposed. Emergency crews rushed toward them as dawn's first faint light broke through the storm clouds, illuminating the shattered ruins of the Tide orphanage behind them. Mercer stared at the waterproof case in her hands. Inside were 2 centuries of hidden crimes. 2 centuries of secrets Greyhaven had buried beneath storms and salt water. And somewhere within those ledgers were names, dozens of them, town officials, business leaders, law enforcement, generations of keepers who had protected the spiral. Reeves looked toward her. "What happens now?" Mercer stood slowly, eyes fixed on the rising sun breaking through storm clouds over the ocean. "Now," she said quietly, "Greyhaven learns the truth." Greyhaven woke to sirens. The storm had passed, but destruction lingered across the coastline. Flooded streets reflected the pale orange glow of emergency vehicles as search teams moved through neighborhoods assessing damage, rescuing stranded residents, and documenting the storm's aftermath. But inside Greyhaven Police Department, a far more dangerous disaster was unfolding. Detective Lena Mercer stood in the evidence processing room, staring at the waterproof archive case resting on the stainless steel table before her. Officers, analysts, and forensic specialists surrounded the room, whispering nervously as Chief Dispatcher Harlan sealed the doors and stationed 2 armed deputies outside. Reeves stood beside Mercer, arms crossed, his exhaustion obvious, but his focus razor-sharp. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Mercer nodded. "Let's expose them." Opening the archive. The waterproof case snapped open with a heavy metallic click. Inside, dozens of leather-bound ledgers lay preserved in vacuum-sealed sleeves, each labeled with dates stretching back over 200 years. Forensic analyst Nora Patel carefully removed the first volume and placed it beneath an overhead scanner. "Earliest entry," Patel said. "Dated 1821. Mercer leaned forward. "Read it." Patel adjusted her glasses, scanning the faded ink. "The Spiral Council convenes. Tidal fluctuations increasing. Selection program authorized to ensure continuity of keeper succession. Approval granted by Harbor Authority, Merchant Council, and Coastal Security Command." Reeves cursed under his breath. "That's not just a cult," he said. "That's government." The names begin. Patel flipped to the final pages of the ledger, her voice tightening as she read aloud. Council members, founding cycle. Mayor Thomas Renshaw. Harbor Master Caleb Stroud. Sheriff Elias Dern. Shipping Guild Director Marcus Vell. Mercer exchanged a glance with Reeves. "Every one of those positions still exists today," Reeves said quietly. Patel reached for the next ledger. And the next. And the next. Each contained updated council rosters across generations, carefully documenting the keeper succession program, and the children selected from the Tide orphanage. By the 4th ledger, the room had gone silent except for the hum of scanning equipment. Patel swallowed hard. "Detective, there are over 100 names listed as council participants across 2 centuries. Mercer felt the air leave her lungs. "How many still alive?" Patel turned toward the computer database, cross-referencing birth records. 37, she said. Reeves whispered, 37 people still operating inside Greyhaven. The conspiracy spreads. The investigation escalated immediately. Arrest warrants were issued. State authorities were contacted. Federal investigators were notified. And that's when everything went wrong. At 11:42 a.m., the police station's internal power grid shut down. Emergency backup lights flickered on as alarms began blaring across the building. Harlan shouted from the communications desk, "Server access breach. Someone's trying to wipe evidence databases." Mercer spun toward Reeves. They're still active. The first strike. Gunshots erupted from the station's front lobby. Officers shouted as civilians scattered through the front entrance. Reeves grabbed his weapon instantly, while Mercer secured the archive case and shoved it into an evidence transport bag. Harlan's voice cracked through the hallway. Armed suspects just forced entry. Multiple attackers. Reeves checked the corridor window, watching 3 masked figures storm through the station lobby, firing suppressed rifles at surveillance equipment and dispatch consoles. "They're not here to kill us," Reeves said. "They're here to destroy the ledgers." Mercer shook her head. "They can't erase 200 years of crimes that easily." Reeves grabbed tactical gear from a locker. "They only need to erase enough to stall prosecution." The siege of Greyhaven PD. The station descended into chaos as Keeper loyalists launched coordinated attacks on evidence rooms, computer servers, and holding cells containing newly arrested suspects tied to the Council network. Mercer and Reeves fought their way toward the forensic wing, exchanging fire with masked attackers attempting to reach the archive storage vault. A bullet shattered a hallway window beside Mercer's head as she ducked behind a concrete support column. "They're trained," Reeves said grimly. "Not random cult followers." Mercer nodded. "Council security detail." She radioed through emergency channel static. "All units, secure evidence Vault Alpha. Repeat, secure Vault Alpha." Nora's discovery. Inside the forensic lab, Patel frantically copied ledger scans onto encrypted backup drives as technicians barricaded the doors with overturned desks. Mercer burst into the room. "How much have you secured?" Patel didn't look up. 30% digitized. The rest still physical. Reeves cursed. "They're going to try and burn this place." Patel handed Mercer a flash drive. "This contains the Council roster cross-reference. If the physical ledgers are destroyed, this can still convict them." Mercer grabbed it tightly. "Then we make sure it survives." The mayor's successor. Suddenly, the barricade door exploded inward as a shotgun blast shattered the hinges. Masked attackers flooded the room, forcing officers into defensive positions. One of the attackers stepped forward, removing his mask slowly. Mercer froze. Councilman Gregory Halvin, Greyhaven's longest-serving city council member. "You should have stayed buried in the storm," Halvin said calmly, raising his weapon. Reeves fired first. The bullet struck Halvin's vest, sending him crashing backward, but not stopping him as the attackers returned fire, shattering glass equipment and sending sparks flying from destroyed forensic scanners. Patel screamed as bullets ripped through evidence shelves. Mercer grabbed her arm. "Back exit now." The evidence escape. Mercer, Reeves, and Patel fled through a rear maintenance corridor as flames began spreading through the lab, ignited by tracer rounds striking chemical storage cabinets. Smoke filled the hallway as sprinklers activated, mixing with fire and shattered glass into a blinding haze. Outside, Mercer shoved Patel toward an evacuation ambulance. "Get this flash drive to state investigators," Mercer ordered. "Don't stop driving until you reach county jurisdiction." Patel nodded, trembling but determined. "What about you?" Mercer turned back toward the burning station. "We finish this. The town turns violent." By late afternoon, Greyhaven descended into full-scale crisis. Multiple council-linked businesses were discovered burning. Suspects fled town in stolen vehicles. Coast Guard units intercepted 2 boats attempting offshore escape routes. Reeves scanned updated arrest reports from inside a mobile command center. "We've detained 14 council members," he said, "but several high-ranking names are still missing." Mercer stared at the last ledger entry displayed on the digital tablet. "Who's the highest-ranking surviving keeper?" Reeves scanned the roster. His face went pale. "There's one name above Aldridge, listed as primary spiral overseer." Mercer's stomach tightened. "Who?" Reeves swallowed. "Judge Eleanor Voss. The final authority." Mercer's pulse quickened. Judge Voss presided over nearly every major criminal case in Greyhaven for the last 20 years. "She controlled sentencing," Mercer whispered, "which means she controlled who disappeared legally and who didn't." Reeves nodded slowly. "And if she's the overseer?" Mercer finished the sentence. "She knows we're coming." The hidden court. An emergency alert flashed across the command center screen. Judge Voss had called for an immediate sealed hearing inside Greyhaven Superior Court. citing emergency municipal authority powers following storm damage. Reeves stared at Mercer. "That's a trap." Mercer grabbed her jacket. "Or it's her final defense." Sirens wailed across Greyhaven as sunset bled crimson across the storm-cleared coastline. The Keeper network was collapsing, but its most powerful architect still held legal authority over the town's justice system, and she had just summoned them into her courtroom. Greyhaven Superior Court stood untouched by the storm. While much of the coastal town still drowned in floodwater and debris, the courthouse rose from the center of town like a monument to authority. Its marble pillars gleaming beneath emergency floodlights, its stained-glass windows glowing faintly against the darkening sky. But tonight, the courthouse wasn't a symbol of justice. It was a fortress. Police cruisers, state troopers, and federal vehicles surrounded the building in a tense perimeter. Officers crouched behind barricades, rifles trained on the entrance as floodlights illuminated every window and doorway. Inside, Judge Eleanor Voss had declared an emergency municipal hearing, one that, under Greyhaven's ancient disaster statutes, granted her full legal command over law enforcement operations during catastrophic town emergencies. Detective Lena Mercer stepped out of the mobile command van and stared at the courthouse steps. "She's using the law to shield herself," Reeves said beside her. Mercer nodded grimly. "And she's counting on us to respect it." The summons. Chief Dispatcher Harland approached them, holding a printed legal document stamped with the town's emergency seal. "She's demanding you appear before the bench immediately," he said. "Claims she's issuing formal rulings regarding the Keeper accusations." Reeves scoffed. "She's staging a trial to bury evidence." Mercer scanned the document carefully. "She's also demanding we bring the surviving ledgers." Harland swallowed nervously. "That sounds like a surrender demand." Mercer folded the paper slowly. "No," she said quietly. "That's an invitation." Entering the fortress, Mercer and Reeves walked through the courthouse entrance under heavy armed escort. Officers remained outside, forbidden to enter under Voss's emergency judicial authority. The building felt eerily calm. Hallway lights flickered dimly, casting long shadows across marble floors polished so perfectly they reflected the glow of emergency exit signs. Court clerks and administrative staff stood silently along the walls as Mercer and Reeves passed, their expressions hollow, frightened, or possibly loyal. Reeves leaned closer. "Feels like walking into a funeral." Mercer whispered back, "Or an execution." The spiral courtroom. The main courtroom doors stood open. Mercer stepped inside and stopped cold. The courtroom had been transformed. Chairs had been rearranged into a massive spiral formation facing the judge's bench. Candles lined the walls where official courtroom lighting had been deliberately dimmed. Court staff and several remaining council members sat within the spiral seating, their faces illuminated by flickering candlelight. And at the center, Judge Eleanor Voss sat behind the bench, dressed not in her usual judicial robe, but in a dark ceremonial cloak embroidered with the spiral insignia stitched in silver thread. Her gray hair was tied tightly behind her head, and her expression was calm, composed, and terrifyingly confident. "Detective Mercer," Voss said, her voice echoing through the courtroom's vaulted ceiling. "Welcome to the final hearing. The true authority." Mercer stepped forward, placing the archive case onto the prosecution table. "You're under investigation for conspiracy, kidnapping, and multiple counts of homicide," Mercer said firmly. Voss smiled faintly. "I presided over those cases, Detective." Reeves raised his weapon slightly. "You don't preside over your own crimes." Voss folded her hands calmly. "Greyhaven exists because of those crimes." Mercer's jaw tightened. "You're admitting it?" Voss nodded slowly. "The Keeper network isn't a cult. It's a governance system older than this country itself. The origin of the spiral." Voss stood, descending from the bench slowly as every person seated in the spiral courtroom watched silently. "In 1819, she began, "Greyhaven was nearly destroyed by a tidal megastorm that sank 12 merchant fleets and killed half the town's population overnight." She walked along the spiral seating arrangement, her cloak trailing behind her like a shadow. "The town founders discovered the tidal resonance chamber beneath the cliffs while rebuilding the harbor. They realized ocean pressure systems here react to lunar gravitational anomalies more intensely than anywhere else along the Atlantic coast." Mercer crossed her arms. and they decided child experimentation was the solution. Voss stopped and turned toward her. They decided survival required sacrifice. The Keeper Doctrine. Voss gestured toward the council members seated in the spiral. For 2 centuries, the Keeper Council monitored oceanic anomaly signals, directing evacuation routes, shipping regulations, and coastal development zoning, preventing disasters the outside world never even noticed. Reeves laughed bitterly. You're claiming you saved lives by murdering children. Voss's voice hardened. Every civilization is built on hidden violence, Officer Reeves. Greyhaven simply chose to control its chaos rather than pretend it doesn't exist. Mercer stepped closer. The Tide Orphanage wasn't survival. It was eugenics. Voss didn't deny it. It was selection. The final ritual. Voss turned toward the courtroom clock mounted above the bench. It read 8:59 p.m. The spiral cycle completes tonight, she said quietly. Mercer felt her pulse spike. What are you talking about? Voss gestured toward the courthouse floor. This building was constructed directly above a secondary tidal resonance node. The founders ensured governance and ritual authority remained physically connected. Reeves whispered. She built the final ritual site under the courthouse. Voss nodded. The storm destabilized the primary chamber beneath the orphanage. Without re-establishing resonance alignment, tidal pressure patterns will spiral into catastrophic surge cycles. Mercer raised her weapon fully. You're not killing another child. Voss shook her head calmly. No child is required. She stepped toward the spiral center. Tonight, the overseer becomes the offering. The hidden chamber. The courtroom floor trembled as mechanical locks disengaged beneath the spiral seating. Marble tiles split apart, revealing a circular stone staircase descending beneath the courthouse foundation. Council members stood simultaneously, blocking exits as concealed weapons appeared beneath ceremonial robes. Reeves whispered, "She's not surrendering." Mercer's voice was steady. She never planned to. The descent. Voss descended the staircase alone, candlelight flickering along the descending tunnel walls as water slowly seeped upward through cracks in the stone. Mercer and Reeves forced their way past the council members in a violent struggle, tackling 2 armed conspirators and sprinting toward the staircase before it could close again. Below, they entered a smaller tidal chamber nearly identical to the one beneath the orphanage, but more stable, more refined, its spiral floor glowing faintly with phosphorescent algae reacting to seawater flowing through carved grooves. Voss stood at the center, removing her ceremonial cloak. "I have dedicated my life to maintaining Greyhaven's survival," she said calmly. Mercer aimed her weapon. "It ends now." Voss nodded peacefully. "Yes, it does." The overseer's truth. Water surged through the spiral grooves as distant thunder rolled across the ocean above. The resonance chamber responds to synchronized neurological wave patterns, Voss explained. Every overseer memorized the tidal equations passed down through the ledgers. Reeves shouted, "You're insane." Voss smiled faintly. "No, I am the final safeguard." She stepped backward toward the chamber's central stone basin as water filled it rapidly. Destroying the Keeper knowledge without stabilizing the resonance will trigger catastrophic coastal collapse within years. Mercer hesitated for the first time. "You could have told the world," she said quietly. Voss shook her head. "The world doesn't listen to towns like Greyhaven." The collapse begins. The chamber ceiling cracked violently as aftershock tremors from the storm shook the courthouse foundation. Water rushed faster through the spiral floor. Voss stepped into the rising basin water. "The spiral demands continuity," she said softly. Mercer lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "No more sacrifices." Voss met her gaze. "Then Greyhaven must learn to survive without lies." Before Mercer could react, Voss broke free and plunged fully into the central basin as the spiral grooves ignited with glowing bioluminescent light, reacting violently to the tidal surge. The chamber flooded instantly. Escape from the court. Reeves grabbed Mercer as the staircase began collapsing behind them. "Mercer, now!" They sprinted upward as water exploded through the chamber floor, flooding the courtroom staircase and sending council members fleeing in panic. Marble flooring cracked open as officers outside stormed the courthouse, arresting surviving conspirators as the spiral seating collapsed inward. Mercer and Reeves burst through the courtroom doors, just as emergency crews evacuated the building. Behind them, the courthouse floor collapsed into the tidal chamber below, sealing the spiral forever beneath thousands of tons of stone and seawater. The spiral falls. Outside, emergency floodlights illuminated the courthouse as helicopters circled overhead. Reeves stared at the collapsing building. She sacrificed herself. Mercer watched silently, or ended 2 centuries of blood. Sirens echoed across Greyhaven as surviving council members were dragged into custody. The Keeper network had collapsed, but the town now faced something far more dangerous. Life without its hidden protectors. The sun rose over Greyhaven for the first time in years without the bells. For generations, the town had woken to their sound, low iron chimes drifting across rooftops like an unspoken command. Children had learned to measure their mornings by it. Shopkeepers opened their doors to it. Families paused their conversations when it echoed across the hills. Now the silence felt louder than any bell. Emergency vehicles lined Greyhaven's narrow streets. Federal agents, forensic teams, and trauma counselors moved carefully through the town like cautious guests inside a haunted house that had finally been illuminated. The spiral had collapsed 3 days earlier, and with it, a legacy stretching back nearly 2 centuries had been dragged into the open. Detective Lila Mercer stood outside the town courthouse, watching reporters gather behind temporary barricades. Microphones, camera rigs, and satellite vans had transformed the quiet mountain town into the center of national attention overnight. Behind her, the courthouse doors remained closed for now. Inside waited the final hearing that would determine how Greyhaven would face the truth. Agent Daniel Klein stepped beside her, handing her a paper cup of coffee. "You ready?" he asked. Mercer stared across the square, where volunteers were removing the final bell from the old town tower. The heavy iron bell swung slowly as cranes lowered it toward a flatbed truck. "I don't think anyone is ready," she said. 3 days earlier, Mercer had walked through the underground spiral chamber for the last time. The chamber had stretched beneath Greyhaven like a hidden skeleton. Tunnels, ritual rooms, recording vaults, and the Keeper archive. Shelves filled with ledgers documenting every disappearance, every sacrifice, every selection made by the secret society known only as the Spiral. The Keeper legacy had begun in 1839. It was founded by 7 town elders who believed Greyhaven could only survive through balanced sacrifice, a doctrine claiming the town's prosperity depended on the controlled removal of chosen residents during cycles they called the renewal. At first, the selections targeted criminals, drifters, and outsiders. Over decades, the spiral expanded its reach. By the 20th century, it had become generational. Families were raised inside the belief system. Children inherited roles. Keepers were groomed from birth. Entire bloodlines were erased quietly to maintain the illusion of a peaceful, untouched town. Mercer had uncovered over 312 confirmed victims, and countless more unrecorded. The courthouse doors opened. A federal marshal nodded toward Mercer. "It's time." Inside, the main courtroom overflowed with residents, investigators, and survivors seated shoulder to shoulder. The air felt thick with grief and disbelief. At the center sat Evelyn Hale, the final keeper. Her gray hair hung loosely around her face, and her wrists remained bound in steel cuffs. She looked smaller than Mercer remembered, diminished without the spiral's power surrounding her. Yet her eyes still carried the cold certainty of someone who had believed she was protecting something sacred. Judge Ramirez addressed the courtroom. "This hearing concerns the dismantling of the clandestine organization known as the Spiral, its historical actions, and the accountability of surviving participants." A murmur spread across the room. Mercer stepped forward to the witness stand. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and sat. "Detective Mercer," the judge said, "please present your findings." Mercer unfolded a thick binder, the Keeper Archive summary. "For nearly 187 years," she began, "the Spiral operated as a hidden governance system inside Greyhaven. Its leadership structure rotated among selected families known as Keepers. Their authority was maintained through ritual selection, coercion, and systemic psychological control over residents." She paused, scanning the faces watching her. "They believed they were preserving balance," she continued, "but what they preserved was fear." Screens inside the courtroom illuminated behind her, displaying recovered ledgers and maps of the underground chamber. Gasps rippled through the crowd as names scrolled across the screen. Generations of missing residents, some listed as far back as the 1800s. Mercer turned another page. The spiral created three primary systems of control. The Bell Network, used to signal ritual phases and instill behavioral conditioning. The Selection Roster, a coded ranking system determining who would be sacrificed during renewal cycles. The Keeper Bloodline Protocol, grooming chosen families to sustain the organization through inherited loyalty. She closed the binder slowly. Greyhaven was never peaceful. It was maintained. The prosecutor stood next. Detective Mercer, how many active spiral members remain unaccounted for? 17 confirmed participants are under federal custody, Mercer replied. 42 individuals were identified as indirect collaborators, many under coercion or generational indoctrination. Do you believe the spiral can reform? Mercer hesitated. The room held its breath. No, she said finally. Not if the truth remains public. Evelyn Hale rose unexpectedly from her seat. I would like to speak, she said calmly. The courtroom erupted in protest. Judge Ramirez raised a hand for silence. You may speak briefly. Evelyn stepped forward, her chains clinking softly. You all believe we were monsters, she said, scanning the crowd. But Greyhaven thrived when other towns collapsed. We survived famine, economic ruin, war. The spiral preserved this town. A woman in the gallery shouted, You murdered our families. Evelyn turned toward her without flinching. We maintained order, she said. Mercer stood slowly. You erased people, Mercer replied, and convinced their neighbors to forget them. Evelyn met her gaze. Without sacrifice, she whispered, Greyhaven will destroy itself. Mercer stepped closer. No, she said quietly. Greyhaven will finally learn to live without fear. Evelyn Hale was sentenced to multiple life terms without parole later that afternoon. 16 remaining spiral leaders received federal charges ranging from conspiracy to first-degree murder. The courtroom emptied slowly, heavy with emotional collapse and fragile relief. Outside, Greyhaven's residents gathered in the town square as cranes removed the final bell from the tower. The mayor, newly elected only 2 days earlier, addressed the crowd. For generations, we were told these bells protected us, she said, her voice shaking. Today, we remove them not to forget our past, but to ensure it never controls our future. Applause rose, hesitant at first, then stronger. Some residents cried openly. Others stood frozen, struggling to process truths that dismantled their entire sense of identity. Later that evening, Mercer and Klein walked through the quiet streets. Do you think the town survives this? Klein asked. Mercer watched families placing candles along the sidewalks, memorial lights for the victims whose remains were still being recovered from the underground spiral chamber. Yes, she said. Why? Because they're choosing to remember, she replied. Near the town cemetery, survivors had begun building a memorial wall. Names carved into stone stretched across multiple slabs, rows upon rows of the lost. A young boy placed a candle beneath one name and stepped back beside his mother. Mercer read the engraving. Sheriff Thomas Hale, the sheriff who had discovered the spiral and attempted to expose it decades earlier, only to be silenced by the very organization he tried to dismantle. Klein noticed Mercer staring. You gave him justice, he said. Mercer shook her head slightly. He deserved to see this, she replied. That night, federal teams sealed the underground spiral tunnels permanently with reinforced concrete and steel. The Keeper archive was transferred to National Evidence Storage. Every ledger, recording, and ritual artifact preserved for historical record and criminal prosecution. Greyhaven would never be allowed to bury its truth again. 3 weeks later, Mercer prepared to leave town. The media frenzy had faded. Recovery operations continued quietly. Therapy programs and relocation assistance were underway for residents who chose to leave. Klein leaned against the SUV as Mercer loaded her files. You always disappear after cases like this? He asked. Usually, she said. You thinking about retiring? Mercer smirked faintly. I'm thinking about sleeping for 2 days. Klein laughed. You're not built for quiet, he said. Mercer looked toward the bell tower one last time. It stood empty now, hollow but honest. Maybe that's the point, she said. As they drove out of Greyhaven, they passed a new sign being installed at the town entrance. The old slogan, Greyhaven, where time stands still, had been removed. The new sign read, Greyhaven, we remember. Mercer watched it fade into the rearview mirror. That evening, deep inside the sealed spiral chamber, construction crews completed their final inspection before locking the reinforced vault doors permanently. The last worker turned off his flashlight and stepped out. The door closed with a thunderous echo. Concrete sealed history inside darkness. But unknown to investigators, hidden behind a collapsed stone wall deep within the farthest tunnel, a narrow compartment remained untouched. Inside sat a small wooden box, dust-covered, forgotten. Inside the box rested a single brass bell, smaller than the others, engraved with a date no one had yet discovered. And beneath it, a folded parchment bearing one sentence written in fading ink. The spiral ends only when memory fails. Miles away, Mercer sat quietly in the passenger seat as Klein drove through the mountains. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to close her eyes. The case was over. Justice had been served. Greyhaven had chosen truth over tradition. Yet deep in her mind, Mercer understood something she would never say aloud. Secrets didn't die easily. They waited. The wind carried softly across the mountain roads. And for just a moment, barely audible, Mercer thought she heard the faint echo of a distant bell. She opened her eyes. The road stretched empty ahead. Klein glanced at her. "You okay?" he asked. Mercer stared forward. "Yeah," she said quietly. But she didn't fully believe it. Far behind them, Greyhaven's candles continued burning through the night, small lights standing guard against darkness that had ruled too long. The town had survived, not because of sacrifice, but because, at last, it chose to remember. Story 2. It began with a phone call that no one wanted to receive. Detective Lila Mercer had just returned to her small-town apartment after a 12-hour shift investigating a string of burglaries. The rain outside pelted the streets like frozen needles, washing the city in gray and shadow. She was about to pour herself a cup of coffee when the phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. Her hand hesitated. Something in the tone of the night made her instincts scream. Answer it anyway. Detective Mercer, a strained voice said on the other end, trembling. It's about Hollow Creek. Hollow Creek was a small riverside town 30 miles north, population 2,400. Mercer had investigated cases there before, mostly petty thefts and domestic disputes. But the voice was urgent, terrified. "Who's calling?" she asked, her professional tone slipping. "My name is irrelevant," the caller whispered. "But someone's disappearing. They've taken my sister, and I think they're going to take everyone next." Mercer's heart raced. She had heard the stories of disappearances before, missing hikers, vanishing teens, unclaimed bodies in the forest. Most had been dismissed as accidental drownings or runaways, but something in this voice made her blood run cold. "I'm coming," she said. "Stay on the line." By the time Mercer drove through the winding back roads of Hollow Creek, the storm had intensified. Trees bent under the weight of relentless wind, and the creek itself had swollen, spilling over the banks and swallowing parts of the old logging road. The town appeared deserted, eerily silent except for the occasional creak of metal roofs in the wind. At the local sheriff's station, Mercer met Sheriff Tom Hendricks, a stocky man with graying hair and a permanent frown etched across his weathered face. "Detective," he greeted, voice low. "I didn't think anyone would come this far." "They told me something was happening," Mercer replied, her eyes scanning the empty parking lot. "Where are the missing people?" Hendricks rubbed his forehead. "It started 2 nights ago. 4 teenagers vanished from the Hollow Creek campground. No signs of struggle. No tracks in the mud. Just gone. Then last night, another family, mother, father, 2 kids, disappeared from their cabin near the northern ridge." Mercer felt the first prickle of fear settle over her. Disappearances in patterns like this were never random. "And no one's seen anything?" she asked. Hendricks shook his head. "The locals are terrified. Some swear they've seen shadows moving near the creek after dark, but no one dares to go out there. The old logging paths, no one wants to step foot there. They say the forest watches." Mercer nodded, already taking mental notes. "I need to see the areas where they disappeared," she said. Hendricks glanced at the creek, its swollen waters churning violently. "Be careful. Hollow Creek doesn't forgive mistakes." Mercer spent the next hour walking the muddy banks of the creek, flashlight cutting through the dense mist that hugged the trees. She noticed subtle irregularities in the terrain, paths that had been recently cleared, branches snapped at waist height, footprints partially washed away by rain. Then she saw it, a strange symbol carved into the bark of an old oak tree, half hidden in moss, a spiral, drawn deep and precise, almost ritualistic. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't random. Someone, or some group, was marking the area, and whatever they were planning, it wasn't over yet. A sudden noise in the underbrush made her spin. Shadowy figures moved through the fog, but before she could react, they vanished, as if swallowed by the forest itself. Mercer's instincts screamed. Hollow Creek was hiding something. Something deadly. And if she didn't uncover it fast, more people would vanish. The storm's fury worsened as night fell, the creek now a raging torrent threatening to sweep away anyone caught in its banks. Mercer looked back toward the town, dark, silent, vulnerable, and knew she was now part of the investigation she had hoped to avoid. The first question she had to answer: who was behind the disappearances? And the second, far more terrifying, why Hollow Creek? This sets up a chilling mystery with a haunted forest, missing townspeople, and a secretive force operating in the shadows. Detective Lila Mercer didn't sleep that night. Hollow Creek's stormy darkness kept her senses sharp, alert. She lay on a thin cot in the sheriff's station, listening to rain hammer against the roof like a warning drum. Every flash of lightning illuminated the room, revealing stacks of old case files, maps of the forested logging areas, and the single spiral symbol she had seen carved into the oak tree by the creek. That symbol gnawed at her mind like a persistent itch she couldn't scratch. By 4:15 a.m., she was dressed and ready. Coffee in hand, she reviewed the sheriff's reports once more. Missing teenagers. 4 high school campers vanished from Hollow Creek Campground. No signs of struggle, last seen near the creek's northern bend. Missing family. Mother, father, and 2 children disappeared from their cabin near the northern ridge. No footprints, no forced entry. Only the spiral symbol found faintly scratched near the cabin's porch. Witness reports: shadowy figures in the forest, untraceable paths, strange sounds at night, whispers among locals of watching trees and the hollow. Mercer traced a finger along the map. The disappearances formed a rough spiral pattern when she connected the dots, starting from the northern ridge, moving toward the creek, and extending into the abandoned logging paths near the old mill. She frowned. The pattern was deliberate. It wasn't random. She turned to Sheriff Tom Hendricks, who was still half asleep in his chair, a mug of cold coffee clutched in his hand. "This isn't natural," she said flatly. 14 people vanish in less than 48 hours, all within this spiral-shaped corridor, and we're supposed to believe the forest swallowed them. Hendricks shook his head. "I don't know what to tell you. I've lived here all my life. Some of the older folks talk about Hollow Creek like it's alive, like it chooses who stays and who disappears." Mercer raised an eyebrow. "And you? I've stayed alive this long," he said grimly, "by not getting too close." Mercer's gut told her that explanation wouldn't suffice. She needed more. Evidence. Patterns. Something solid. By first light, Mercer and Agent Daniel Klein had set out toward the northern ridge. The storm had passed, leaving Hollow Creek damp and foggy, with clouds clinging low over the trees. The logging paths were slippery, the mud sucking at their boots with each step. The town behind them was still empty, the few residents who remained huddled inside their homes, peeking through rain-smeared windows. Mercer carried a GPS unit, a flashlight, and a small notebook. Klein carried a camera, tape measure, and a portable digital scanner to detect unusual magnetic or thermal activity. "This spiral symbol," Klein said, pointing to Mercer's notebook. "You think it's connected to the disappearances?" "I know it is," Mercer replied. "It's showing up at each location. Campground, family cabin, even near that abandoned mill foundation. Whoever's doing this is marking their territory." Klein frowned. "Territory for what? Hunting humans?" Mercer didn't answer immediately. She squinted toward the dense tree-line. Patterns weren't always obvious at first glance. Sometimes you had to trace the chaos, like connecting stars in a night sky. "The spiral," she whispered. "It's not just a symbol. It's a path." Klein looked at her. "A path?" "Yes," she said, kneeling in the mud. It starts small, near the northern ridge, then expands in widening loops. The victims vanish along this path. Whoever or whatever is taking them is guiding them, or us, along it. Klein's face tightened. So we're walking into their design? Exactly. They reached the first marked location, a clearing near the creek where the 4 teenagers had last been seen. The ground was soft and muddy, churned by heavy rainfall, but Mercer noticed subtle irregularities, faint footprints that seemed almost deliberate, leading into the forest, then vanishing completely near a large boulder shaped like a fallen log. "Here," she said, kneeling beside a half-buried metal object. She brushed mud away to reveal a small brass bell, tarnished and engraved with initials, the first letters of the teenagers' names. Klein's voice dropped. "A bell." Mercer's lips pressed into a thin line. "They're leaving markers like breadcrumbs, or warnings." A flash of lightning illuminated the dense trees beyond. Mercer's eyes caught a flicker of movement, a shadow darting between the trunks. She tensed, signaling for Klein to stay quiet, but when she stepped closer, it was gone. "Someone's here," she murmured. Klein shook his head. "No one is here. The forest is empty." But Mercer knew better. Hollow Creek didn't leave anything truly empty. Shadows moved where no one walked. Following the trail, they moved deeper into the forest, noting each spiral symbol etched into trees or scratched into rocks. Some were small, barely visible. Others were large, bold, almost ceremonial. The more symbols they found, the more Mercer noticed subtle changes. The spirals seemed to grow increasingly precise the deeper they went, as if someone was guiding their route or taunting them. By midday, the trail led to the abandoned logging mill. Its roof had partially collapsed decades ago, and the surrounding area was overgrown. Mercer stepped cautiously through the broken doorway, flashlight revealing rotting machinery and rusted conveyor belts. Inside, the spiral symbols covered the walls, the floor, and even the ceiling beams, painted in dried mud and ash. At the center of the room, she found a circle of small brass bells arranged in a spiral pattern identical to the ones outside. "Do you see this?" Mercer whispered. "They're recreating the symbol as a ritual." Klein adjusted his camera, photographing everything. A warning or a trap? Mercer's gaze narrowed. She noticed something else. The floorboards beneath the central spiral were slightly raised. She tapped them carefully. A hollow sound answered. "Underground," she said softly. "There's a basement beneath this floor. A cellar. Whoever's taking people is using it." Klein's eyes widened. "We don't even know who whoever is yet." Mercer knelt and brushed mud off a nearby pulley system. "It doesn't matter. Whoever is behind this has planned it carefully. They're organized, precise. And the spiral pattern? It's more than a symbol, it's a map." By late afternoon, they had documented the spiral's progression. Each mark, each bell, each carving formed a lattice of routes crisscrossing the forest, always converging at one central location. The old Hollow Creek lighthouse, long abandoned but perched on the highest cliff overlooking the river bend. Mercer stared at the lighthouse through binoculars. Its windows were dark and empty, but faint smoke trails or fog could have concealed movement. The question burned in her mind. Were the victims being held there? Or worse, already gone? "Looks like our next stop," she said, tightening her coat. Klein frowned. "You sure we shouldn't wait for backup?" Mercer shook her head. "There isn't time. If they're using this spiral as a hunting ground, the next disappearance could be happening right now." As evening approached, the forest grew colder. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, twisting across the broken remnants of logging paths. Mercer and Klein moved with extreme caution, flashlight beams bouncing off the dense foliage. At one point, Mercer stumbled over a root and landed against a tree. Her hand brushed the bark, and there it was again, a faint spiral, carved deep enough to leave a scar in the wood. Klein pointed to it. "Every turn, every intersection, it's guiding us somewhere." "Yes," Mercer said, "and whoever left these wants us to follow them." A sudden gust of wind rattled the trees. From the fog, they heard faint noises, soft footsteps, whispers, a rhythmic clinking sound. Mercer's stomach tightened. "Bells," she whispered. "They're coming for us now." Before Klein could respond, a figure emerged from the mist, tall, cloaked, moving silently across the muddy forest floor. The figure stopped just beyond the edge of the flashlight beam and raised a hand. Mercer froze. The spiral symbol on their cloak matched the carvings and brass bells perfectly. The game had begun. The patterns in the shadows were no longer just maps. They were warnings. They were signals. They were invitations. And Mercer understood with a cold certainty that Hollow Creek's forest had already claimed the night, and they were walking straight into its spiral heart. Detective Lila Mercer had followed the spiral into the forest for nearly 3 hours, Klein at her side, their flashlights cutting swaths of white light through the thick fog. Every step was measured, deliberate. The mud beneath their boots sucked and slipped with each movement. Shadows clung to the trees like living things, bending and stretching as the wind whispered through the pines. They had stopped only once, beside a small creek branch where Mercer found another brass bell, tarnished and engraved with the initials of the missing mother. She had pressed it into her jacket pocket, a grim reminder that the disappearances were ongoing. Not historical, not random, but alive. The forest, Mercer knew, was designed to disorient. Trails looped back on themselves. Fallen branches created false paths. And every spiral symbol carved into bark or scratched into stones was both a marker and a challenge. Follow or perish. And Mercer, for all her experience, felt the first flicker of doubt. Finally, through a dense wall of fir and alder, a faint structure emerged, a house, but unlike any she had seen. It was small, isolated, constructed from dark wood that seemed to absorb the surrounding fog. The windows were black, their glass grimy but unbroken. Vines crawled up the walls, almost as if the forest itself had grown over the building to hide it. "This has to be it," Mercer whispered. Klein's voice was cautious. "It's too perfect. Hidden, isolated, no footprints leading directly to it. How have they kept it so concealed?" "They're meticulous," Mercer said, scanning the perimeter. "Everything we've seen, the spirals, the bells, it all leads here. Whoever is behind this has been planning for years, maybe decades." They moved closer, boots silent on the damp forest floor. Mercer signaled for Klein to stop. She crouched, inspecting the ground. There were subtle depressions, footprints, but strange. Some human-sized, some smaller, and some that seemed wrong, elongated, distorted. She frowned. "They're not trying to hide their presence completely," she said. "They're letting us see it, just enough to lead us in." Klein swallowed hard. "Why?" Mercer didn't answer. She already had a hypothesis. Circling the house, they found the front door slightly ajar. Mercer signaled again, flashlight beam fixed on the dark interior. She placed a hand on the doorframe and pushed. The house creaked, releasing the scent of damp wood and decay. Dust motes danced in their lights. The interior was small, a living room with a single fireplace, a kitchen with rusted utensils, and a staircase leading to a second floor. But the most striking feature was the floor in the center of the living room. A spiral pattern carved deep into the wood, surrounded by dozens of small brass bells, each engraved with names they had found in the Hollow Creek police reports. Klein knelt beside them, photographing each bell. This is the map," he said, voice low. "Every victim represented here." Mercer ran her fingers over one of the bells. The metal was cold and polished, freshly cleaned. Someone had been here recently, maybe even now. They ascended the staircase carefully, the wooden steps groaning under their weight. The upper floor consisted of a single hallway with 3 doors on either side. Mercer motioned for Klein to follow her toward the first door. It opened into a small bedroom. The room was eerily normal. A bed neatly made, a desk with papers scattered, a chair turned on its side. But the desk drawer contained something unsettling, journals. Mercer pulled one out, its leather cover worn but well maintained. She flipped through it. Each entry was meticulous, almost clinical. Dates, times, observations, and disturbingly, notes on individuals. Some were descriptions of behavior: fear, compliance, resistance. Others were more ominous, recordings of nightly routines, travel patterns, even psychological evaluations. "This isn't just a hideout," Mercer said quietly. "It's a command center. Someone is orchestrating everything, the disappearances, the spiral patterns, the traps, from here." Klein nodded slowly, eyes scanning the room. "Whoever this is, they're organized beyond reason. And they've been at it for years." Mercer closed the journal. "This is our first tangible lead. And it's terrifying." The next room held something even more disturbing. On the wall, several photographs were pinned. The missing teenagers, the vanished family, and even older images from Hollow Creek's history, spanning decades. Some faces Mercer recognized from old cold cases. Others were unknown. Beneath each photograph was a number, some circled, some crossed out. Mercer's mind raced. The spiral pattern wasn't random. It was a selection system. Whoever the orchestrator was, they had been keeping meticulous records for decades, marking people in their network of disappearances. "This is the spiral," Mercer whispered. "The same pattern we saw in the forest and at the creek. They're all connected, each disappearance a piece of the spiral, each bell a reminder, each mark a guide." Klein's hand trembled slightly as he photographed the wall. "This is insane. How has no one discovered this before?" "Because," Mercer said grimly, "the spiral doesn't want to be discovered." As they moved into the third room, the air grew colder. Mercer noticed a faint draft, as if the house itself exhaled through hidden vents. At the center of the room, a trapdoor was cleverly concealed under a rug. Mercer knelt, inspecting it. "Underground," she said. "They've been keeping people here." Klein's eyes widened. "Hostages? Or worse," Mercer replied, placing a hand on the metal handle. She could feel the cold steel beneath her fingers. Whoever orchestrated this had been patient, careful, and meticulous. Every step was calculated. Every spiral, every bell, every symbol had led to this. With a deep breath, Mercer pulled the trapdoor open. The hinges protested, groaning like ancient lungs. Below, a narrow staircase led into darkness, the faint scent of damp earth and something metallic rising to meet them. Mercer checked her flashlight, then descended first. Klein followed, the wooden steps creaking under their weight. At the bottom, the space widened into a low-ceilinged chamber. Mercer's flashlight beam swept across rows of makeshift cages. Some held remnants, blankets, personal items, small toys. Mercer's stomach turned. Whoever this was, they had been collecting people for a long time. Some of the cages were empty. Some had signs of recent occupancy. And at the far end of the chamber, a series of monitors displayed live feeds from the forest, the creek, and various points around Hollow Creek. Mercer froze. "They're watching," Klein whispered. Mercer's mind raced. Every spiral, every bell, every symbol was part of an orchestrated system, a network of observation and control. Whoever was behind this had been predicting her movements even before she arrived. "This is bigger than Hollow Creek," she muttered. "Much bigger." Suddenly, a faint sound echoed from above, the floorboards creaking. Mercer raised her hand, signaling Klein to stay silent. The sound grew, footsteps, deliberate and slow. Mercer's heart pounded. "Hide," she whispered. They ducked behind one of the cages. Through a narrow gap, Mercer saw a figure descending the stairs. Cloaked in black, their face obscured, the person carried a small leather satchel. They moved to the center of the chamber, kneeling beside the spiral of bells, and began inspecting each one meticulously. Mercer's pulse raced. The spiral orchestrator was here, and they hadn't noticed her, yet. She whispered to Klein, "We need evidence. Photos, journals, anything we can use to identify them. But we have to be careful. One wrong move and..." A bell clinked. The figure froze, slowly lifting their head. Mercer held her breath, heart thundering. Then the lights from the monitors flickered. One of the cameras outside had been triggered. The orchestrator stood abruptly, reaching for something. Mercer knew in that moment that their time to hide was over. This wasn't just a hidden house. It was a trap, and they had walked straight into it. Outside, the storm clouds rolled back in over Hollow Creek. The forest seemed to tighten around the house, the shadows long and alive. Somewhere deep in the trees, another bell rang, soft, deliberate, and chilling. Mercer realized with cold clarity, this was only the beginning. The spiral's network was active, precise, and lethal, and the next step in the investigation would take them deeper into its heart. The forest had claimed the night, and now it had claimed her attention completely. Detective Lila Mercer sat at the sheriff's station long after midnight. The journals and photographs from the hidden house spread across the table like a grim mosaic of Hollow Creek's darkest secrets. Each page, each image, each bell she had collected in the forest contributed to one undeniable conclusion. The spiral was not merely a pattern in space, but a pattern in time. Klein leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "I've been staring at these maps and this timeline for hours, Lila. And I still don't understand how anyone could orchestrate all of this. Decades of disappearances, all converging in this town. His voice trailed off. Mercer didn't respond immediately. Her mind was tracing lines between dates, locations, and victims' names. She had noticed something earlier. The way the spiral symbols in the forest and the house aligned, not only geographically but temporally. Each disappearance was spaced at seemingly random intervals, yet patterns emerged when plotted along a timeline stretching decades back. "Look at this," she said finally, pointing to a chart she had painstakingly drawn. The first documented disappearance was 1953. Then one in 1962, 1971, 1980, 1989, 1998, 2007, 2016, and now 2025. Klein raised an eyebrow. "So roughly every 9 years?" "Not exactly," Mercer said, "but there is a rhythm, almost like cycles. Each wave of disappearances grows in frequency and intensity. The spiral is a repeating system, and the current orchestrator is accelerating it." Klein leaned forward. "You really think it's a family legacy? A generational network?" Mercer nodded slowly. "That's my working hypothesis. Look at the journals from the hidden house. Some entries date back to the early 1960s. They reference earlier disappearances, describe rituals, and even mention previous operatives in the forest. Whoever is running this now didn't start from scratch. They inherited it. They decided the only way to understand the spiral was to trace it through time." Mercer pulled out a wall map of Hollow Creek, pasting color-coded notes over decades. Each disappearance, each symbol, each bell became a node in a vast, invisible web. "See here," she said, pointing to a cluster near the northern ridge. 3 disappearances occurred within a 10-year span in the 1980s, all linked to the old logging camp. Then the spiral moved east, toward the creek, and finally to the abandoned lighthouse. Klein frowned. "It's like they're choreographing it, setting the stage for every next move. And somehow they know when to act. How could they predict all of this?" "Experience," Mercer said. "They're learning from history. Every failure, every escape, every mistake of past operatives is recorded and used to refine the spiral. It's adaptive. It's evolutionary." The more Mercer studied the data, the more she realized that the spiral wasn't just a local phenomenon. Patterns in Hollow Creek mirrored other disappearances across the state, odd vanishings that had been written off as accidents, drownings, or missing persons. The spiral was older, wider, and far more organized than anyone could have imagined. By early morning, Mercer and Klein had reconstructed a timeline stretching back 72 years. Each layer revealed horrifying consistencies. Victims chosen for perceived vulnerability. Locations selected for isolation and natural concealment. Symbols, the spiral, always etched into the surrounding environment. Bells, brass markers left as warnings, messages, or guides. A constant observer, someone monitoring, controlling, and refining the system. Mercer stared at the overlapping spirals on the wall map. "It's like time itself is a spiral," she whispered. "Each generation repeats the same patterns, each disappearance echoing the last, each bell a signal to the next phase." Klein shivered. "And the recent disappearances? They're accelerated?" "Yes," Mercer said. "We're looking at an orchestrator who knows the entire history and is trying to condense the cycle. The frequency of vanishings is increasing because they're testing their method, perfecting it, and they may already be preparing the next phase, the next wave of victims." The spiral, Mercer realized, was both a physical and temporal map. It guided movement through space, the forest, the creek, the hidden house, the lighthouse, and through time, past, present, and perhaps even future. Each step was deliberate, each signal precise, each bell ringing in sequence across decades. Mercer closed her eyes for a moment. The full scope of Hollow Creek's nightmare became clear. The spiral was alive, a system honed over generations. It was adaptive, learning from failure, correcting itself. The orchestrator was highly intelligent, methodical, and deeply rooted in the town. "And we're just seeing one part of it," Mercer muttered. Klein leaned over. "What do we do? How do we catch something like this?" Mercer opened her eyes, determination hardening her features. "We follow the spiral to its source. Every symbol, every bell, every mark is a clue. If we can understand the sequence, the rhythm, we can anticipate the next move. We can intercept it before more people vanish. The next lead came from the journals. Mercer had noticed recurring mentions of a location called the Heart, always capitalized, always referenced with reverence and fear. It wasn't on any map, and references were vague. But when she overlaid the spiral patterns on the town map, a location emerged, the abandoned lighthouse at the cliff's edge overlooking the swollen creek. Klein frowned. "You think that's where they keep the victims? Or where they conduct their rituals?" Mercer said. "Either way, that's our target." Before heading to the lighthouse, they decided to visit the only surviving family of the recent disappearances, the siblings of the teenagers who vanished from the campground. The siblings were sheltered in a safe house provided by the state. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic. The two teenagers, Emily and Jack, were pale, frightened, but unharmed. Mercer knelt beside them. "We're here to help," she said gently. "We're trying to understand what happened to your friends. Can you tell me anything unusual you noticed in the days before they disappeared?" Emily's eyes were wide, trembling. "The forest, it was watching. We saw figures sometimes, shadows moving between trees, but when we tried to look closer, they disappeared. And there were bells, brass bells. We found one near the creek. It rang even when the wind didn't blow." Jack nodded, clutching a blanket. "And the spirals, carved into trees. Everywhere we went. We didn't understand them at first." Mercer exchanged a glance with Klein. "This confirms the pattern," she said softly. "The orchestrator is using symbols and bells to guide or manipulate their victims. And now we know the sequence, the spiral of time. Each disappearance isn't isolated. It's part of a continuous, growing cycle." By afternoon, Mercer and Klein had returned to the forest, moving toward the cliffside lighthouse. The sun was low, the fog rolling off the swollen creek like a ghostly tide. Every spiral symbol along the path reinforced what Mercer had learned. The orchestrator wanted them to follow, to see the pattern, to understand its logic. The final climb was treacherous. Rocks slick with rain, hidden roots threatening to trip them. Mercer felt the weight of history pressing down. The missing victims, the generations of spiral operatives, the legacy of terror embedded in Hollow Creek's soil. When they finally reached the lighthouse, it loomed over them like a sentinel of fear. Its walls were streaked with age, windows dark, but the door stood slightly ajar. The faint echo of bells, almost imperceptible, seemed to resonate from within, matching the rhythm of the forest spiral. Mercer checked her flashlight and gun. Klein did the same. "This is it," Mercer whispered. "The center of the spiral. Time and space converge here. And inside, we're going to find everything we need, or nothing at all. But either way, we're walking straight into the orchestrator's domain." A gust of wind rattled the lighthouse door. The faint clinking of brass reached their ears again, almost melodic, almost welcoming. Mercer swallowed, heart pounding. The spiral of time was no longer abstract. It was real, immediate, and lethal. And the next step would decide who would survive Hollow Creek's dark legacy, and who would vanish into it. Detective Lila Mercer stood before the lighthouse, the so-called Tower of Judgment, its weathered walls towering over the cliffside like a silent executioner. The fog swirled around the base, curling through cracks in the stone like phantom hands reaching for her. Mercer's pulse quickened. She could feel the weight of decades of disappearances pressing down from above, each spiral in the forest, each bell, each carved tree, converging on this single point. Klein checked his equipment for the third time, his hands trembling slightly. "You sure this is wise?" he whispered. "We don't even know what's inside." Mercer tightened her grip on the flashlight. "We don't have a choice. This is the center of the spiral, the orchestrator's domain. Everything we've traced, every disappearance, every bell, every symbol leads here. If we want to stop this, we have to go in." The door groaned as Mercer pushed it open. Inside, the smell of mildew and rust was thick, a damp tang that seemed to cling to their lungs. The spiral staircase wound upward, each step creaking under their weight. The light from their flashlights bounced against the cracked walls, revealing strange symbols etched into the stone, spirals, triangles, and sigils Mercer didn't recognize, but whose design mirrored the forest markings. At the top of the tower, the room opened into a circular chamber. Windows framed the cliffside below, the creek winding like a silver snake through the fog. And in the center, arranged on a large, raised platform, were the remnants of what Mercer could only describe as a shrine. Brass bells lined in perfect spirals, photographs of victims from decades past, and journals stacked meticulously in towers like fortresses. "This is it," Mercer whispered. "The judgment chamber." Klein's flashlight swept across the room. "It's ritualistic. But why here? Why this tower?" Mercer's eyes narrowed. "Symbolism. Elevation. Visibility. It's a statement, a display of power over the spiral's cycle. Each victim, each bell, each symbol reinforces control. They're saying, 'I am above time, above the forest, above life and death.'" Her gaze fell on a journal placed at the center of the platform. It was bound in black leather, worn but polished, and beside it lay a small, intricately carved wooden figure, a spiral etched into its base. Mercer felt a chill run down her spine. Whoever wrote this journal had orchestrated countless disappearances, studied human behavior, and planned with the patience of decades. Mercer picked up the journal and began to read. The entries detailed the spiral's history. 1953, the first victim. "The system works," the author wrote. "The spiral guides them, the bells mark them, and the forest chooses the weak." 1962, expansion of the spiral. "Each cycle refines the process. The pattern must remain hidden yet visible, simple yet complex." 1980s, introduction of secondary operatives. "They must maintain the rhythm, keep the spiral moving. The legacy must continue." 2000s, acceleration. The spiral's influence grows. Victims are now aware, but cannot escape. They will teach the next generation. Klein leaned over her shoulder. This is insane. This person's been planning for decades. And somehow, they've kept it all secret." "Yes," Mercer said. "And now they're testing their methods again. The recent disappearances aren't random, they're a trial. A rehearsal for something bigger." As they delved deeper into the room, Mercer noticed faint scratches along the floorboards, almost invisible unless examined closely. She traced them with her flashlight. They led to a narrow hatch in the far wall, partially hidden behind a stack of journals. Klein frowned. "Another basement?" Mercer shook her head. "No, this is different. The hatch isn't for storage. It's for control. Whoever the orchestrator is, they monitor the tower from here. This could be where the victims are held, where the spiral cycle is observed and refined." Carefully, Mercer lifted the hatch. A narrow passage descended into darkness, the smell of damp earth and something metallic hitting them immediately. She lowered herself first, Klein following closely behind. The air grew colder, heavier, the silence pressing against their ears. At the bottom, the chamber opened into a subterranean room, a perfect circle carved into the cliff itself. And at the center, a series of cages lined the perimeter. Some contained personal belongings, blankets, journals, toys, evidence that the orchestrator had kept people here for varying lengths of time. But the most terrifying sight was the monitors lining the walls. Screens displayed live footage of the forest, the creek, the lighthouse exterior, and even the logging paths. Mercer's stomach tightened. "They're watching," Klein whispered. "Yes," Mercer said. "Every move we've made, every step along the spiral, has been observed. And now they're testing us." Suddenly, a sound echoed from above, a bell ringing. Not one of the small brass bells scattered around the chamber, but a deep, metallic toll, resonant and commanding. Mercer's heart pounded. "The trial begins," she muttered. "We're inside the orchestrator's domain. And they know it." From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked, face obscured, moving with deliberate precision. They carried a small satchel, which they set beside the central platform. Mercer raised her flashlight and her gun simultaneously. "Show yourself," she demanded. "We know you're here. Step into the light." The figure paused, then slowly lifted the hood. The face beneath was startling, calm, calculating, almost serene. A woman mid-40s, with eyes sharp and unyielding. "You've come far, Detective Mercer," the woman said, voice smooth, controlled. "But the spiral doesn't allow interruptions lightly." Mercer felt a chill. "Who are you? Why Hollow Creek? Why the spiral?" The woman's lips curled into a faint smile. "Legacy. Order. Control. The spiral is not random, not chaotic. It is the refinement of human behavior. Those who enter its path are either shaped or removed. You see patterns in the shadows, Detective. I see clarity." I see perfection. Klein stepped forward, voice shaking. You've taken people. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Why? How can you justify this? The woman tilted her head. Justification is unnecessary. The spiral exists because it must. Life is disorder, chaos. I impose order. And sometimes order requires sacrifice. Mercer's mind raced. This was no random killer. This was an architect of terror, a master strategist who had been perfecting the spiral for generations. Suddenly, the monitors flickered, and the brass bells scattered throughout the tower began to ring. Soft at first, then louder, in a synchronized rhythm. Mercer realized with horror. The orchestrator had triggered the bells as a signal. Your time is limited, the woman said. The next phase begins. If you leave this place alive, consider yourself lucky. But first, you must navigate the spiral within the tower. Only then can you reach its center. Mercer's pulse quickened. The spiral she had followed in the forest now extended into the tower itself. A labyrinth of stairs, corridors, and hidden passages designed to test her, to separate her from Klein, to see if she could survive the first true trial of the orchestrator. Klein swallowed hard. Lila, what do we do? We follow the spiral, Mercer said firmly. Every symbol, every bell, every mark is a clue. We stay together, stay sharp, and we find the center. That's where the spiral's heart and our answers are waiting. The orchestrator's voice echoed through the chamber, soft but omnipresent. Judgment comes for all who enter the spiral. You will either understand or become part of it. Mercer tightened her grip on her flashlight and gun. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Hollow Creek's dark legacy pressing down on her. Then, with Klein at her side, she stepped forward into the labyrinthine spiral of the tower. Each step creaked ominously. Each shadow seemed alive. And somewhere deep within the spiral, the orchestrator waited, watching, ready to judge. The first trial had begun. Detective Lila Mercer and Agent Daniel Klein moved cautiously through the narrow spiral corridors of the lighthouse tower, their flashlights slicing through darkness thick with dust and the smell of damp stone. Every step echoed ominously, amplified by the circular chamber's walls. The orchestrator's voice still reverberated in Mercer's mind. Judgment comes for all who enter the spiral. You will either understand or become part of it. Mercer's eyes scanned every symbol etched into the walls. The spiral motifs in the tower were more intricate than any she had seen in the forest or the hidden house. They weren't just guides, they were warnings. These aren't random, Mercer whispered to Klein. Each spiral here corresponds to a trial, a test. Whoever designed this tower knows exactly how humans think, how they panic, how they fear. Klein swallowed hard, gripping his flashlight like a weapon. I feel like we're walking into a death trap. There's no way out if something goes wrong. Mercer didn't respond. Her mind was racing. Every symbol, every bell, every journal entry hinted at a legacy that extended beyond the town itself. Hollow Creek wasn't just a location. It was a microcosm of a system, a network of secrets and silent complicit actors spanning generations. The first challenge appeared almost immediately. Mercer and Klein reached a small chamber where the floorboards were uneven. As Mercer stepped forward, one board collapsed, revealing a hidden pit lined with spikes. She barely leapt back in time, grabbing the edge of the remaining floor. Booby traps, Klein whispered, his voice tight. She set this place to kill intruders. Yes, Mercer said, breathing heavily. The spiral isn't just a path. It's a weapon. Whoever orchestrated this expects us to fail. Carefully, they traced a safer route around the collapsed floorboard. Mercer's eyes caught something odd, scratches along the walls that didn't resemble the spiral symbols. They were tiny markings, almost imperceptible, leading to a loose panel in the corner of the room. She pried it open, revealing a narrow passage that sloped downward. Inside were old newspapers and photographs dating back decades. Articles about disappearances, obituaries of people who had vanished without explanation, and photographs of Hollow Creek residents, many of whom were still alive. Klein's face went pale. Why would she have this? Are these potential victims? Mercer shook her head. Not victims yet. Participants. The orchestrator doesn't just take people randomly. She selects, grooms, and manipulates them. Look here. She pointed to a photograph of a local man from the 1970s. He's marked with a symbol. That's the spiral mark. He was part of the system, probably an operative. She uses the same people to maintain the spiral across generations. Klein frowned. You mean the townspeople are involved? Yes, Mercer said grimly. The spiral has supporters, co-conspirators. Some fear her, some obey her for power, some are too weak to resist. Hollow Creek isn't just a town, it's a network of compliance and complicity. And that's the deadly secret. Following the passage further, they descended into a hidden cellar beneath the lighthouse. Here, the air was thick with a metallic tang of rust and something else, decay. Mercer's flashlight illuminated rows of old crates, each marked with a spiral and a date. Some contained personal effects of the missing. Others held journals, small brass bells, and tools used to carve the symbols in the forest. This is her arsenal, Mercer said quietly. She's preserved evidence, keeps records, and uses it to refine the spiral. Klein frowned. And she's been doing this for decades. How have authorities never caught on? Because the town protects her, whether willingly or out of fear, Mercer said. Some of the older families have known about the spiral for generations. They passed down instructions, warnings, and loyalty to the system. Hollow Creek citizens are the system's lifeblood. As Mercer spoke, she noticed a small alcove at the far end of the cellar. Inside, hundreds of small envelopes were stacked neatly, each labeled with a date and a name. Mercer picked one up. The name was familiar, a child who had vanished from the creek 20 years ago. She opened it, revealing letters, drawings, and a small diary page describing the child's final days before being taken. They document everything, Klein said, voice barely audible. Every person, every reaction, she watches and records them. Yes, Mercer said grimly, and the spiral grows stronger with each observation. Each disappearance, each new participant, each mark in the forest feeds the system. That's why she's accelerating her operations now. The spiral is evolving. A sudden noise drew their attention, a soft shuffle, almost imperceptible, coming from a darker corner of the cellar. Mercer raised her flashlight, revealing a figure crouched behind a crate. It was a woman, disheveled and pale, her eyes wide with fear. Mercer approached slowly. It's okay. We're not here to hurt you. Who are you? The woman's voice trembled. I was part of it. I helped her once. But I didn't want to anymore. She doesn't forgive. Who? Klein asked, stepping closer cautiously. The orchestrator. Evelyn Crane. She's been running the spiral for decades. The townspeople, they all obey her. Or they disappear. Mercer's heart sank. Evelyn Crane. The name matched a series of clues Mercer had found in the journals. Evelyn had orchestrated disappearances for decades, creating the spiral's network and training successive generations of operatives. She's here in Hollow Creek? Mercer asked. Yes, the woman whispered. She watches, she controls, she knows every secret. And she's preparing something. A new phase. More disappearances. Mercer exchanged a grim look with Klein. We need to stop her. Now. The woman, whose name was revealed as Margaret, guided them through a hidden door leading into the forest. There's a path, she said. It's how she brings new people into the spiral. If you follow it, you'll reach her location. But she's prepared for intruders. Many who follow the path never return. Mercer nodded. We have no choice. If we want to save the next victims, we have to move. As they stepped into the forest, the spiral symbols reappeared, carved into trees, scratched into rocks, and marked with fresh mud. Mercer realized something terrifying. Evelyn had anticipated their pursuit. The spiral was a living system, and now it was testing them. The forest seemed alive, each shadow moving as if aware of their presence. Bells rang faintly in the distance, a rhythmic chime that seemed to echo from every direction at once. Mercer felt the pressure of history, every disappearance, every operative, every ritual pressing down on her. The spiral had watched them, led them here, and now it was observing their every move. As dusk approached, Mercer and Klein found themselves at the edge of the clearing where the orchestrator frequently conducted her operations. A series of logs had been arranged in a circle, with spiral symbols etched into each one. Mercer's eyes scanned the ground. Fresh footprints led to the center, where a single brass bell lay, glinting in the fading light. This is it, Mercer said. The center of the spiral's operations. The hub. This is where Evelyn orchestrates everything. Klein looked around nervously. And the trap? Mercer's gaze hardened. Every step we've taken has been a trap. But now, we have the evidence, we have Margaret's help, and we know the layout. We can anticipate her moves. She picked up the brass bell. Its chime echoed through the clearing, sharp and clear. Mercer felt a shiver run down her spine. The spiral had marked her. It had noticed her. And now, the next phase of the hunt, the confrontation with Evelyn Crane, was inevitable. As night fell over Hollow Creek, the forest seemed to close in around them. Shadows stretched unnaturally, wind whispered like voices from the past, and somewhere in the darkness, the orchestrator watched, waiting, calculating. Mercer realized with grim clarity, Hollow Creek's deadly secret wasn't just Evelyn Crane. It was the town itself, the network she had built, the generations of compliance, and the living spiral that would continue unless they stopped it. And Mercer knew. The next confrontation would not just be about survival. It would be about exposing the full truth and ending the spiral once and for all. The town's deadly secret was about to be revealed. Detective Lila Mercer crouched behind the thick trunk of an ancient pine as the forest around her seemed to hold its breath. The fog had thickened, curling through the underbrush like a living entity, hiding both danger and the path forward. Beside her, Agent Daniel Klein adjusted his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gray mist but barely revealing what lay ahead. Margaret, the former operative who had guided them, whispered urgently, "She's here. Evelyn Crane. I can feel it. She knows you're coming." Mercer's jaw tightened. After decades of disappearances, decades of manipulation, and decades of silence, they were finally here. Evelyn Crane, the architect of the spiral, the woman who had orchestrated Hollow Creek's nightmares, was no longer a shadow on paper, no longer just a name in journals. She was real, standing somewhere beyond the fog, waiting for them. They approached the clearing that Margaret had described. The ground was littered with brass bells, arranged in spirals that mirrored the symbols they had followed through the forest and into the tower. Each bell seemed to emit a faint, vibrating hum, resonating through the soles of Mercer's boots. "The spiral's alive," Mercer muttered. "It's not just a series of symbols. It's a system, and these bells are its nodes, its heartbeat." Klein scanned the area, eyes narrowing. "And Evelyn is the heart of it." Mercer nodded. "Exactly. And hearts are dangerous when cornered." From the shadows emerged a figure, tall, elegant, with a grace that belied the malevolence she carried. Evelyn Crane's eyes glinted in the dim light, sharp and calculating, and her expression held neither fear nor surprise. She had been expecting them. "Detective Mercer." "Agent Klein," Evelyn said, her voice calm, controlled. "I've been waiting for you." Mercer stepped forward, flashlight in one hand, gun in the other. "You've terrorized this town for decades, Evelyn. The spiral ends tonight." Evelyn smiled faintly. "The spiral cannot end. It is a cycle, an inheritance, a living structure. You see patterns in shadows. I see purpose, order. And I have built something far greater than you can comprehend." Klein spoke cautiously. "People have vanished, families destroyed. How do you justify this?" Evelyn's eyes darkened. "Justification is irrelevant. The spiral exists because disorder exists. Life is chaos, and chaos must be refined. Some pay the price, others learn the lesson. This is the order of things." Mercer's mind raced. For decades, the spiral had shaped Hollow Creek. Every disappearance, every bell, every symbol had been a calculation, an experiment in control. Evelyn's reach was vast, her influence woven into the town's very structure. The spiral wasn't just hers, it was the town's, and the town was hers. "You've manipulated generations," Mercer said. "How many people have you forced into your system?" Evelyn gestured gracefully to the clearing. "More than you can count, fewer than you fear. And soon a new phase begins. The spiral accelerates." Mercer's stomach tightened. "New phase? That means more disappearances." "Yes," Evelyn said simply. "And you're standing in its path. The question is, will you survive?" Without warning, the bells around the clearing began to chime, soft at first, then louder, each tone perfectly sequenced. Mercer realized with horror, this wasn't just auditory. The bells were triggers, connected to hidden mechanisms in the clearing. Steel wires ran between them, partially buried in the soil, leading toward pressure plates and concealed traps. Klein stepped back. "She's rigged this place. Every step could be a trap." Margaret whispered urgently. Follow the spirals, not the ground. Trust the pattern. She wants you to fail. Mercer nodded. Each spiral symbol carved into the surrounding trees, and logs formed a path through the traps. Every step along the spiral was deliberate. Mercer's pulse quickened as she followed the pattern, Klein close behind, Margaret guiding them with quiet precision. The clearing narrowed into a wooden platform elevated above a pit. The brass bells continued to chime, their resonance growing louder, echoing through the forest. Mercer noticed chains dangling from the platform's edges and ropes tied to hidden pulleys. The orchestrator had prepared contingencies for every possible move. This is it, Mercer whispered. The tower's spiral converges here. The center, the hub of her operations. Evelyn's voice echoed again, soft but commanding. Step carefully. The spiral is a living thing. One wrong move, and it consumes you. Mercer and Klein moved forward, analyzing every rope, chain, and bell. They had already seen what Evelyn could do. Traps in the tower, hidden chambers, the orchestration of decades of disappearances. They could not underestimate her. As they approached the center, Mercer's eyes caught something unexpected. A series of photographs displayed in chronological order. They were images of Hollow Creek residents across generations, each marked with a spiral symbol. Some were deceased, some missing, some still living but altered in subtle ways. Fear in their eyes, obedience in their posture, compliance in their gestures. She's been molding this town for decades, Klein whispered. Each person a piece of her design. Yes, Mercer said grimly. Each disappearance, each bell, each spiral, it's all part of her experiment. The spiral isn't just about control, it's about transformation. And she's perfected it over generations. Suddenly, Evelyn moved closer, stepping onto the platform with a grace that was both chilling and commanding. Detective Mercer, Agent Klein, she said, voice calm but imbued with authority. You have followed the spiral far, but understanding its pattern is not the same as mastering it. You may know my methods, but you cannot anticipate the spiral itself. Only I can. Mercer tightened her grip on her gun. We know enough to stop you. The spiral ends tonight, Evelyn. Evelyn's smile widened, almost amused. Ends? No. The spiral is eternal. And yet, you may prove interesting. Let us see if you survive its next trial. With a swift motion, she pressed a hidden lever. The platform beneath Mercer and Klein shifted, tilting dangerously. Bells clanged violently, chains rattled, and sections of the platform gave way, revealing concealed pits lined with spikes. Mercer and Klein leapt back just in time, landing on solid ground. Margaret shouted, "Follow the spiral markings. She's testing you." Mercer and Klein sprinted along the marked spiral path, each step precise, dodging traps, leaping over pits, and avoiding swinging pendulums that emerged from the shadows. The forest seemed alive with movement, as if Evelyn had animated the spiral itself. Finally, they reached the platform's center. Evelyn stood waiting, calm, her expression unreadable. Mercer raised her gun. "It's over, Evelyn. We know who you are, what you've done, and we have evidence. The spiral ends now." Evelyn's eyes gleamed with amusement. "Do you? You understand only part of it. The spiral is not mine alone. It belongs to the town, to its legacy, to its fear. Even if I fall, the spiral will continue." Margaret stepped forward, anger and fear mingling in her voice. "Not if we stop it tonight. Enough people have suffered. Enough families destroyed." Evelyn's calm demeanor faltered slightly, the first crack Mercer had seen. "You think you can undo 70 years of work?" "Yes," Mercer said firmly. "We can and we will. Because Hollow Creek deserves the truth, not your control." The confrontation reached its peak. Evelyn lunged toward a concealed lever behind her, intending to trigger another deadly trap. Mercer acted instinctively, tackling her to the ground. Bells clanged, chains rattled, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Klein restrained Evelyn, while Mercer pressed her gun firmly against Evelyn's temple. "It's over," Mercer said, voice steady despite her racing heart. "No more spiral. No more disappearances. You're done." Evelyn's eyes, sharp and calculating, softened briefly, a glimmer of recognition, or perhaps resignation. "You may stop me, but the spiral, it is larger than one person." Mercer nodded. "Then we'll expose it. Every secret, every accomplice, every generation. It ends tonight. Outside, the fog began to lift as dawn approached. The town of Hollow Creek slowly awoke to a new reality. The orchestrator was captured, the spiral's secrets were beginning to emerge, and the town's deadly legacy would finally face justice. Mercer looked at Klein and Margaret. We've done the hard part, but the investigation isn't over. Hollow Creek has a long history of complicity. We need to uncover everyone involved and dismantle the spiral completely. Klein nodded. And we will. This town won't control its fear any longer. Mercer's gaze shifted to the lighthouse, the Tower of Judgment looming behind them. It had been the center of decades of terror, but now, with the orchestrator exposed, the spiral's influence could be broken. For the first time, Mercer allowed herself a brief moment of relief. The spiral had a name. Its architect had a face. And justice, finally, was within reach. Detective Lila Mercer and Agent Daniel Klein emerged from the lighthouse tower into the gray dawn, the fog still lingering over Hollow Creek like a shroud. The Tower of Judgment loomed behind them, silent now, its spirals etched into the walls and floor like a testament to decades of terror. Evelyn Crane, the orchestrator of the spiral, was restrained in the back of a sheriff's vehicle, her calm demeanor unbroken despite her capture. But Mercer knew the spiral's grip on the town went far beyond one woman. We've caught her, Klein said, rubbing his eyes. But the spiral, it's bigger than we imagined. Mercer nodded. Exactly. Evelyn was the architect, but the mechanism itself is widespread. Hidden in the town, in families, in operatives trained over decades. If we're going to end this, we have to dismantle the final mechanism, the network that keeps the spiral alive. Margaret, the former operative guiding them, stepped forward. Her expression was grim. The spiral isn't just a series of disappearances. It's a system of control. Bells, spirals, rituals, they are nodes in a living network. Stop the orchestrator alone, and the system will continue. You have to dismantle every component. Mercer drew a deep breath. Then we start with the key locations. The forest paths, the hidden house, the lighthouse. Every spiral mark, every bell, every trap must be accounted for. They returned to the forest, the first rays of sunlight slicing through the mist. Mercer and Klein followed Margaret along the spiral-marked trails, each step a reminder of the danger that had stalked Hollow Creek for decades. The forest was eerily silent. Birds that had once flitted nervously among the trees now seemed to watch, their eyes tracking the investigators as if aware of the spiral's unraveling. Margaret pointed to a carved tree near the creek. Each of these spirals was a checkpoint. Bells were used to signal operatives. The spiral was constantly monitored, refined, and enforced. This is the first place you dismantle. Mercer nodded and began photographing the carvings, noting patterns, directions, and potential triggers. Klein moved the brass bells, carefully marking their positions and noting connections to nearby roots, wires, and hollow trees. This will take time, Klein said. We need to map everything before we touch it. One wrong move, the spiral could still kill or disappear someone. Yes, Mercer agreed. But every node we dismantle weakens the network. We have to be meticulous. This is the final mechanism, the last chance to stop the spiral. Back at the hidden house, the second major node of the spiral, Mercer examined journals, maps, and photographs scattered across dusty tables. Each entry detailed operational methods, instructions to operatives, and notes on potential participants. The spiral had been taught, passed down, and reinforced for generations. These journals, Klein said quietly, they're training manuals. Manuals for disappearances, for controlling people. Mercer's eyes scanned one particularly old entry, dated 1972. The spiral is eternal. It will survive any individual. The bells mark them. The patterns guide them. The forest observes them. Only perfection allows continuation. Perfection, Mercer repeated. She understood now why Evelyn had been so patient, so meticulous. Every step had been calculated. Every disappearance, every ritual, every bell had been a test of human behavior, for both the victims and the operatives. Margaret stepped forward. And the final mechanism, it's not just in the forest or the house. It's in the town itself. Families, businesses, officials, everyone who obeyed her, knowingly or unknowingly, is part of it. The spiral's influence reaches into the fabric of Hollow Creek. You can't dismantle it without exposing them all. Mercer clenched her jaw. Then that's exactly what we'll do. Their next stop was the lighthouse, the epicenter of Evelyn's operations. The tower, previously a symbol of judgment, now represented the final mechanism itself. Mercer and Klein entered the tower cautiously, Margaret guiding them past residual traps. Bells were disconnected, spirals photographed, and hidden levers and mechanisms carefully catalogued. "This place," Klein whispered. "Every lever, every chain, every bell, it's all part of the system. One move here could trigger disappearances elsewhere." "Yes," Mercer said. "The spiral is networked, not just local. Evelyn designed it so that disruption in one area would create chaos elsewhere. That's why we need precision." They began dismantling each trap methodically, using Margaret's knowledge of the spiral's design. Brass bells were removed and catalogued, chains disconnected, hidden levers blocked. Every spiral mark was documented, every journal cross-referenced with the forest patterns. The work was painstaking, exhausting, and dangerous. One misstep could trigger a secondary mechanism, leaving them trapped or worse. Hours passed, and the fog outside began to lift. Mercer felt the weight of decades of terror lifting slightly with each bell removed, each trap neutralized, each spiral accounted for. But the sense of finality eluded her. The spiral's influence was deeply entrenched. Even if the mechanisms were dismantled, the town's complicity remained. By evening, they had neutralized the primary nodes of the spiral: the forest, the hidden house, and the lighthouse tower. Margaret led them to the outskirts of Hollow Creek, pointing to several homes and businesses known to have been controlled or influenced by Evelyn. "These people," Margaret said, "they enforce the spiral silently. They're loyal, afraid, or corrupted. To end the spiral, you must expose them. The final mechanism isn't just physical, it's human." Mercer nodded. "Then we start with evidence. We've documented everything: journals, photographs, traps, patterns. This is enough to indict operatives, collaborators, and enablers. Hollow Creek will finally see the truth." Klein looked over at her. "You think the town can survive it? Once people know the depth of the spiral's influence?" Mercer's gaze hardened. "They have to survive it. They have no choice. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about awareness. The town must confront its own complicity. Only then can the spiral be truly broken." Night fell over Hollow Creek as Mercer and Klein returned to the lighthouse tower one last time. Evelyn Crane was being transported to a secure facility, her calm demeanor unshaken. Mercer reviewed the catalogued evidence: spiral symbols, brass bells, hidden mechanisms, and detailed journals spanning decades. Every trap dismantled, every node neutralized. The spiral was no longer functional. Yet Mercer knew the spiral's true strength had always been human. Families, friends, and officials, all conditioned over decades to obey the system. Dismantling the physical traps was one step. Dismantling the culture of fear and complicity was another. Margaret placed a hand on Mercer's shoulder. "You've done what most thought impossible. The spiral's machinery is broken. But the town will take time to heal." Mercer nodded, her gaze shifting to the fog-laden horizon. "We'll be here to make sure they do. Hollow Creek deserves justice, closure, and the chance to reclaim their town." A final chime echoed from the distant hills, a lone brass bell, the last remnant of Evelyn Crane's spiral. Mercer felt a chill, knowing that while the mechanisms had been dismantled, the legacy of fear would linger. But for the first time in decades, Hollow Creek had a chance. The spiral's cycle was broken. The final mechanism had been neutralized, and the town's deadly secret, once buried in shadows, was exposed to the light. Mercer exhaled deeply, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease. The spiral was no longer a threat, but the work of ensuring justice and uncovering every hidden accomplice was just beginning. The battle wasn't over, but the spiral had been stopped, its clockwork of terror dismantled. For Mercer, Klein, and Hollow Creek, dawn signaled the first day of freedom. The morning sun broke weakly through the fog over Hollow Creek, casting pale light across a town still shaken by decades of hidden terror. Detective Lila Mercer stood in the town square with Agent Daniel Klein and Margaret, scanning the streets for signs of life. The spiral had been dismantled, the lighthouse tower neutralized, the hidden house cleared, the forest's traps catalogued and disabled. But Mercer knew that Evelyn Crane's influence had penetrated deeper than physical mechanisms. It had lived in the people, the families, and the town itself. "This is it," Mercer said quietly. "The collapse begins now. We have the evidence, the witnesses, the operatives. It's time Hollow Creek faces the consequences." Klein frowned. "Consequences? You mean arrests?" Mercer shook her head. "More than arrests. Exposure. Public acknowledgement of decades of complicity. The town needs to understand how deeply the spiral reached before they can rebuild." Margaret stepped forward. "You're ready for what happens next?" Mercer's jaw tightened. "There's no choice. It has to happen." The first wave of the collapse began with the town council. Mercer and Klein, backed by state investigators, entered the council chambers. Evelyn's network had strategically placed loyal operatives in positions of authority, and the council was no exception. "You have evidence against you," Mercer said, addressing the shocked council members. "You've known about disappearances, you've enforced the spiral's rules, and you've kept silent. Every action, every omission, every mark of compliance is documented. The spiral ends today." The room erupted into disbelief. Some members tried to deny involvement, while others turned pale, unable to reconcile the truth. Margaret presented journals, photographs, and the cataloged brass bells, each item tracing the web of influence Evelyn had woven for decades. You knew," one councilman stammered. "All this time? We thought she was just eccentric. We didn't realize." Mercer's gaze was icy. "You were part of it, complicit, whether by fear, obedience, or ambition. You enabled her. And now the spiral collapses, starting with you." As the council's complicity was exposed, the townspeople gathered outside, murmuring in shock and anger. The spiral's influence had conditioned generations to obey, to fear, to comply without question. Now the truth spilled into the streets. Margaret addressed the crowd. "The spiral has existed here for decades, guided by one woman, Evelyn Crane, but enforced by many. Families, officials, businesses, all played a role, knowingly or not. The town has a chance to reclaim itself. But you must confront the truth." The crowd's reaction was a mixture of horror, grief, and outrage. Some wept openly for missing relatives. Others shouted accusations at neighbors, realizing how deeply the spiral had infiltrated every aspect of life. Mercer scanned the faces. Fear still lingered, but now it was mingled with the possibility of justice. Meanwhile, inside Hollow Creek's administrative offices, Mercer and Klein worked with state investigators to process the evidence. Files, journals, photographs, and recordings from the Tower of Judgment were cataloged and cross-referenced with decades of missing persons reports. "This is extensive," Klein muttered, scrolling through digital copies of the journals. "The spiral isn't just a local network. Some of the operatives, they're part of families that have been controlling this town for generations. It's massive." Mercer nodded. "That's why the collapse is so critical. We don't just arrest Evelyn's allies. We expose the system, document the spiral's reach, and make sure every operative is held accountable. This town cannot recover until the web of complicity is fully dismantled." As the investigation intensified, Evelyn Crane was moved to a secure facility. Despite her capture, she remained unflinching, watching events unfold on monitors showing the town's chaos. "You think this destroys me?" she said quietly, a smirk playing on her lips. "It destroys nothing. The spiral is larger than me. It lives in the people, in their fear, in their obedience. You may dismantle my tools, but the system endures." Marg Mercer leaned forward, voice calm but firm. "Not if we expose it. The spiral's influence survives only in secrecy and silence. Now that everything is revealed, its power is gone." Evelyn's eyes glimmered with cold amusement. "We shall see. You may have dismantled the structure, but you cannot undo the patterns in their minds. Fear, compliance, it lingers. And sometimes that is enough." The true collapse of Hollow Creek came as the town confronted its citizens. Families were forced to acknowledge their roles, direct, indirect, or coerced, in maintaining the spiral. Businesses that had facilitated the disappearances, knowingly or through fear, were shut down. Officials who had ignored or enabled the system faced arrest and public trial. The town's history was rewritten in newspapers, broadcasts, and court records, documenting the spiral's reach and revealing the orchestrator's decades-long manipulation. At the center of this unraveling, Mercer and Klein faced their own reckoning. Years of investigations, near-death encounters in the tower, the forest, and the hidden house had brought them to this point. The collapse was not just structural, it was emotional, psychological, and societal. The town was tearing itself apart to survive. Margaret guided them through a final checkpoint, a secluded area of the forest where Evelyn had once held rituals to train operatives. The ground was scattered with remnants of brass bells, journals, and symbols. "This is the heart of the spiral's human component," she said. Here, the last traces of her control remain. Mercer knelt, examining the artifacts. Each bell, each journal entry, each symbol represented manipulation, lessons in obedience, fear, and control. "We document everything," she said. "Nothing can be left unexamined. The town must know how deeply the spiral reached." As the day progressed, the psychological impact of the spiral became clear. Residents who had been complicit, whether actively or passively, struggled with guilt and shame. Others, who had been victims or narrowly escaped the spiral's influence, faced trauma that would linger for years. Hollow Creek's collapse was both literal and figurative, a social and moral unraveling of decades-long deception. Klein observed quietly, "This town, it's broken. Some will never forgive themselves, some will never trust again. Is that what justice looks like?" Mercer's eyes hardened. "Justice isn't comfort, Klein. Justice is truth." The spiral thrived in darkness and silence. "We've exposed it. That's the point. The town can rebuild, but only if they confront everything: fear, complicity, and the consequences of silence." The final confrontation with Evelyn Crane, though contained in a secure facility, mirrored the town's collapse. The orchestrator maintained her calm composure, yet Mercer saw subtle cracks: frustration at being removed from control, impatience at the unraveling of decades of careful planning, and a faint glimmer of fear as she realized the system she had perfected was being dismantled piece by piece. "You've destroyed my mechanisms," Evelyn said to Mercer. "But the spiral, it exists in the minds of these people. You cannot stop the patterns, only contain them." Mercer's voice was steady. "We've exposed the patterns. We've neutralized your tools. And we will document the influence until no secret remains. The spiral survives only in darkness. That darkness is gone." By nightfall, Hollow Creek had fully entered the collapse phase. Arrests were made, public disclosures broadcast, and town meetings convened to acknowledge decades of hidden terror. Families reunited with loved ones once hidden by fear and secrecy. Survivors recounted stories that had been buried for decades. The town was fractured, grieving, and awakening to the full truth of Evelyn Crane's spiral. Margaret, standing beside Mercer, spoke softly. "The spiral is gone. The mechanisms, the network, the operatives all accounted for. But the town will never be the same." Mercer nodded. "It doesn't need to be. It needs to be honest, aware, and vigilant. That's the only way the spiral can truly end." As the fog lifted completely, the Tower of Judgment, now silent and stripped of its control mechanisms, loomed in the distance. Hollow Creek faced its reckoning. Decades of terror exposed, secrets revealed, and a community forced to confront its complicity. The spiral had collapsed, but its legacy would linger, a warning for generations to come. Mercer and Klein stood together, gazing at the town below. They had dismantled the final mechanism, confronted the architect, and initiated the reckoning. The town had entered the most dangerous and transformative phase of its history, and Mercer knew that the final chapter, justice, closure, and the possibility of true recovery, was only beginning. The morning sun rose over Hollow Creek, casting its pale light across a town that had begun the painful process of reckoning. The fog that had long cloaked the streets and forests in secrecy was gone, revealing every corner of the town. Every street, every building, every hidden place that had once facilitated decades of terror under the spiral. For the first time in generations, the town faced its history in full view. Detective Lila Mercer walked slowly down Main Street, Agent Daniel Klein at her side. The streets were quieter than usual, but the tension in the air was palpable. Residents emerged from their homes, faces lined with fear, grief, anger, and for some, hope. The collapse of the spiral had left a vacuum of both power and understanding, and the town was struggling to comprehend how deeply the orchestrator, Evelyn Crane, and her network had infiltrated their lives. Margaret, who had guided Mercer and Klein through the spiral's labyrinth, followed behind. Her eyes, hardened by years of participation in the spiral, reflected both relief and sorrow. "It's happening," she said softly. "They're finally seeing it." Mercer nodded. "Yes, but seeing it is only the first step. Now comes accountability." The town's council chambers had been transformed into a temporary tribunal. Local officials, some implicated in the spiral and others merely witnesses to its horrors, faced the scrutiny of state investigators, journalists, and the community itself. Families came forward with stories of disappearances, mysterious rituals, and the unspoken rules that had governed their lives for decades. Each testimony revealed a new layer of complicity and fear, illustrating the vast reach of Evelyn Crane's spiral. Mercer and Klein stood at the front of the chamber as Margaret helped coordinate the release of the evidence collected during their investigation. Journals, photographs, brass bells, spiral carvings, and documented accounts from surviving operatives and victims. The room was heavy with tension. "Every piece of evidence," Mercer said, addressing the gathered officials, "documents not only the orchestrator's actions but also the roles each of you played. Silence, obedience, and fear allowed this system to thrive. Today, the spiral ends, and Hollow Creek finally faces the truth." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Some officials bowed their heads in shame. Others tried to argue, claiming ignorance or misunderstanding. But the evidence was undeniable. Decades of careful records, photographs of marked operatives, and journals describing the systematic control and training of participants left little room for denial. Klein stepped forward, addressing the crowd. "Justice isn't only about punishment. It's about truth. Every family, every resident, every person affected by the spiral has a right to know what happened. This tribunal ensures that those responsible are held accountable, whether by law or public reckoning." Outside, the townspeople gathered in small groups, discussing what they had learned. Survivors who had been hidden or silenced for decades shared stories of manipulation and fear. Children of missing families asked questions that had gone unanswered for generations. Some cried openly, others listened in silence, trying to piece together the reality they had never dared confront. Mercer walked through the crowd, her presence a calm anchor in the sea of shock. People approached her, sharing fragmented memories, asking questions, and sometimes simply seeking reassurance. "The spiral was real," she told them repeatedly. "But it's gone. You are free to rebuild, to reclaim your lives, and to demand justice." Margaret joined her, guiding survivors to the documents and evidence that had been secured. "These records are important," she said, "not only to prosecute the operatives, but to preserve the truth. Hollow Creek must remember, so it never happens again." Meanwhile, Evelyn Crane remained in the secure facility, her calm demeanor unshaken. She had been fully interrogated, yet her responses revealed both pride in her accomplishments and a chilling acknowledgement of the spiral's potential to endure in memory alone. "You've dismantled my mechanisms," Evelyn said to Mercer during one of the final interrogations. "But the spiral is not just tools and traps. It lives in fear, in obedience, in the choices people make. You cannot erase that." Mercer met her gaze steadily. "No, but we can expose it. We can ensure that every operative, every enabler, every co-conspirator is held accountable. That's how you end a system like the spiral, not just by capturing its architect, but by dismantling its network and ensuring transparency." Evelyn's eyes glimmered with cold amusement. "And you think that will prevent it from returning? Fear never dies completely. Curiosity and ambition will take its place." "Yes," Mercer said firmly, "but fear will no longer be guided in secret. Hollow Creek will know, and knowledge is power. The spiral's reign of terror ends today." The town's justice system moved swiftly. Trials were convened for officials who had enforced or ignored the spiral, families who had shielded operatives, and individuals complicit in the disappearances. Evidence collected by Mercer, Klein, and Margaret formed the backbone of these proceedings. The courts moved to prosecute not just the orchestrator, but the network that had maintained the spiral for decades. Survivors testified, revealing hidden rituals, secret pathways, and the twisted hierarchy that Evelyn had established. Each account strengthened the case, ensuring that the truth could not be denied. The town, once paralyzed by fear, began to confront its complicity and demand accountability. Margaret worked closely with investigators, providing insight into the system she had once served. Her knowledge allowed them to identify remaining operatives and ensure no one could hide in the shadows. "It's painful," she said quietly to Mercer, "but it's necessary. The spiral cannot continue to claim lives or influence minds. Hollow Creek must face the full truth." In the aftermath, Hollow Creek began a slow, painful recovery. Families reunited with missing members or came to terms with long-lost loved ones. Community meetings were held to discuss the spiral, to confront the complicity that had allowed it to thrive, and to plan a future built on transparency and trust. Mercer walked through the town one final time, observing both despair and hope. She saw survivors finding strength in one another, children playing cautiously in the streets, and older residents speaking openly about mistakes and lessons learned. The spiral had left scars, but it had also awakened a determination to rebuild and reform. Klein joined her, observing the streets with a mixture of relief and somber reflection. The spiral's influence was deep. "Do you think the town can really recover?" Mercer nodded. "It will take time. The wounds run deep. But the truth is out. The spiral's mechanisms are gone, its network dismantled, and its orchestrator behind bars. Now it's up to the town to rebuild. That's the only real justice Hollow Creek can have." At the lighthouse, the Tower of Judgment stood silent, stripped of its tools, its spirals neutralized, and its traps dismantled. It had been the center of decades of terror, but now it served as a symbol of accountability, a monument to the town's resilience and the dangers of hidden control. Mercer and Klein climbed to the top one last time, surveying Hollow Creek from above. The town sprawled beneath them, quiet but alive, the fog lifted, sunlight breaking through, and the air filled with the cautious optimism of a community emerging from darkness. "This is the end of the spiral," Mercer said softly, "but not the end of our work. We have to make sure the town remembers, documents, and prosecutes fully. Only then will Hollow Creek truly be free." Klein nodded, his gaze sweeping the town. "And the survivors? They reclaim their lives," Mercer said. "They rebuild, and they ensure the spiral never rises again. Justice isn't just punishment. It's awareness, responsibility, and vigilance." The final moments of the investigation were both emotional and cathartic. Mercer oversaw the cataloging of every artifact, journal, and photograph. Margaret assisted in identifying operatives and revealing hidden participants. The community began attending public forums, hearing the full history of the spiral and its impact. The process was painful, but it was necessary. Hollow Creek had faced its darkest secret and emerged into the light. Evelyn Crane, confined and powerless, could only watch as her life's work crumbled. The spiral's mechanisms were neutralized, the network dismantled, and Hollow Creek, once a town of fear and secrecy, had begun the long, difficult process of justice, accountability, and healing. Mercer finally allowed herself a moment of rest, standing on the edge of the lighthouse cliff as the sun rose fully over the town. Hollow Creek would never be the same. The spiral's legacy would linger in memory, but the town had reclaimed its future. Justice had been served, the orchestrator captured, the network dismantled, and the town at long last could breathe free. Hello everyone. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep. So before you get cozy, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Story 1. The lighthouse on Blackshore Point had been abandoned for 42 years. But every 7 years, it turned on by itself. No electricity, no caretaker, no explanation, and every time its light returned, someone from the nearby coastal town vanished. Chapter 1. The Light That Shouldn't Exist. The storm arrived without warning. Wind screamed across the jagged cliffs of Blackshore Point. Crashing waves slammed against the rocks below, and rain fell sideways, erasing the horizon between ocean and sky. Detective Rowan Hale tightened her coat as she stepped out of her vehicle near the Blackshore police barricade. The air smelled of salt and wet stone. Emergency lights reflected off puddles scattered across the cracked coastal road. She had transferred to Blackshore only 3 weeks earlier, expecting quiet coastal cases. Smuggling, theft, maybe the occasional missing tourist. Instead, she had arrived on the night the lighthouse turned on. Again. Detective Hale? She turned to see Sheriff Marcus Bell approaching. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried the exhaustion of someone who had seen the same nightmare too many times. "You picked a bad week to arrive," Bell said. Rowan glanced past him. There it stood, the Blackshore Lighthouse, perched at the edge of a jagged cliff like a skeletal finger pointing at the storm clouds. Its white stone tower was cracked, weathered, and partially collapsed near the top. The metal railing spiraling around its exterior had rusted away decades ago. But the light, the rotating beam of pale yellow illumination, sliced through the storm in perfect rhythm, sweeping across the ocean as if guided by an unseen keeper. Rowan frowned. "There's power running to it?" she asked. Bell shook his head slowly. "Power lines were cut in 1984, he said. "Generators removed. Wiring stripped. That tower hasn't had electricity in over 4 decades. Rowan watched the beam rotate again, illuminating the furious ocean. "Then how is it working?" Bell didn't answer immediately. Instead, he handed her a thin folder, its edges frayed with age. "Because every time that light turns on," he said quietly, "someone disappears." The pattern. They stood inside the sheriff's temporary command tent overlooking the cliffs. Officers moved nervously outside, radios crackling, search teams preparing boats despite the dangerous surf. Rowan flipped through the folder. 7 names were listed. 7 years apart. 1977, 1984, 1991, 1998, 2005, 2012, 2019. Each entry had one thing in common. No bodies. No suspects. No witnesses. And tonight marked the 7th year since the last disappearance. "You think someone's already missing?" Rowan asked. Bell nodded grimly. "Teenager named Lila Grant. 17. Last seen walking home from her shift at the Pier restaurant 3 hours ago." Rowan's chest tightened. "Security footage?" "Working on it," Bell said. "But there's something else." He pulled a photograph from the folder and placed it on the table. Rowan stared at it. It showed the lighthouse entrance, a massive iron door at the base of the tower. Painted on the door was a symbol, a spiral. But unlike typical spirals, this one had jagged, uneven edges, like it had been drawn by someone shaking. "When was this taken?" Rowan asked. "Tonight," Bell said. "The local legend." Thunder rattled the tent as Bell poured 2 cups of stale coffee. "You need to understand something," he said. "Blackshore doesn't just treat the lighthouse as abandoned." Rowan raised an eyebrow. "They treat it like it's cursed." Bell leaned against the table. "The lighthouse was built in 1893 after a cargo ship crashed into the reef and killed 30 sailors. For nearly 80 years, keepers lived there. Families rotated through shifts maintaining the light." "What happened in 1984? Rowan asked. Bell hesitated. "The last lighthouse keeper disappeared," he said. Rowan looked up sharply. "During a storm almost identical to tonight." The keeper's log. Bell reached into the folder again and pulled out a leather-bound notebook sealed inside plastic. "The last entry was written by Keeper Daniel Cross," Bell said. "Recovered inside the tower after he vanished." Rowan carefully opened the protective sleeve and read the final entry aloud. "The light has started moving on its own again. I tried shutting it down, but the machinery is cold, rusted, dead. And still it turns. I hear footsteps above the lantern room when no one is there. The ocean sounds wrong tonight. If the spiral returns, I must not follow the light. God help anyone who does." Rowan slowly lowered the journal. "You said machinery was removed," she said. "It was," Bell confirmed. "And no one ever found Cross?" "No." Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the lighthouse through the tent window. The beam rotated again. Steady. Precise. Alive. The first clue. A deputy rushed into the tent, soaked from the rain. "Sheriff, we found something." Moments later, Rowan and Bell stood near the base of the cliff road overlooking the shoreline below. Rescue crews had gathered around something tangled in driftwood. A backpack. Bell zipped it open carefully. Inside were textbooks, a cracked phone, and a folded employee badge. Lila Grant. Blackshore Pier Restaurant. Rowan swallowed. She came this way, she said. One of the rescue divers approached. There's footprints leading toward the lighthouse trail, he said. But they stop halfway up the path. Stop? Rowan asked. The diver nodded, like she vanished mid-step. The trail. Ignoring Belle's warnings, Rowan insisted on walking the trail immediately. The storm intensified as they climbed the narrow stone path carved into the cliffside. Waves crashed violently below them, spraying cold mist high into the air. Rowan's flashlight beam bounced across the trail until she saw them. Footprints. Small, barely visible in the mud. They led straight toward the lighthouse. Then suddenly, they stopped. Not faded, not washed away. Stopped. Rowan crouched down, tracing the last visible impression in the mud. She was walking normally, she said. No signs of struggle. Belle shined his light around the area. There's nowhere to go. Cliff on one side, rock wall on the other. Rowan slowly stood. Unless she didn't leave, she said quietly. The door. They reached the lighthouse base minutes later. The iron door loomed above them, rusted and massive. Rainwater trickled down its surface, streaking the faded white paint. But the spiral symbol was fresh, bright, still dripping. Rowan touched it carefully. Paint. Still wet. Belle cursed under his breath. No one's been inside that tower since 1984, he said. Rowan pointed toward the rotating beam above them. Then someone is inside now. Thunder exploded overhead. The lighthouse light rotated, sweeping directly over them, bathing the doorway in pale yellow glow. For a brief moment, Rowan thought she saw a silhouette moving behind the cracked lantern glass far above. Watching them. The decision. Belle grabbed Rowan's arm. We wait for backup, he said firmly. Rowan stared at the iron door. Sheriff, if Lila's inside, she doesn't have time. Belle hesitated, conflict flashing across his face. Another thunderclap shook the cliffs. The lighthouse beam rotated again. Closer. Slower. Like it was tracking them. Rowan reached toward the rusted handle. Belle inhaled sharply. Detective, people who enter that lighthouse during the light cycle don't come back. Rowan tightened her grip. Then it's about time someone does. She pulled the door open. It groaned loudly, echoing into the darkness beyond. The smell hit them instantly. Salt water, rot, and something metallic, like rusted blood. Inside, a spiral staircase wound upward into darkness, illuminated only by faint, flickering reflections of the rotating beam above. Rowan stepped forward. Behind her, the lighthouse door slammed shut on its own. Belle spun around, grabbing the handle. It wouldn't budge. From somewhere deep inside the tower, a faint voice echoed downward. A girl's voice. Help me. Rowan and Belle exchanged a horrified glance. Then the light above them suddenly stopped rotating. For 3 seconds, everything went completely dark, and when the beam resumed, it was facing directly downward, shining straight at them. The beam of the lighthouse burned downward like a spotlight from another world, trapping Rowan Hale and Sheriff Marcus Bell in its pale glow. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. The silence inside the tower felt unnatural, thick, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were listening. Then, from somewhere far above, the girl's voice echoed again. Please don't leave me here. Rowan's pulse hammered against her ribs. That was her, she whispered. That was Lila. Belle swallowed hard. Sound carries weird inside towers. Could be wind. Could be. That was her, Rowan repeated firmly. The beam above them resumed its slow rotation, sweeping shadows across the spiral staircase, winding upward through the tower's hollow center. The steps were rusted metal, slick with condensation and flecked with decades of salt corrosion. Rowan raised her flashlight. Only one way to find out. The spiral staircase. Each step groaned under their weight as they began climbing. The air inside the lighthouse was colder than outside, heavy with the scent of mildew and ocean decay. Their boots echoed against the hollow metal, sending hollow vibrations spiraling upward into darkness. Rowan kept her light trained ahead, but her eyes kept drifting toward the center of the staircase shaft. The inside of the tower was enormous. Old iron beams crisscrossed the hollow core, forming skeletal supports that disappeared into shadow above. Faint streaks of light flickered through broken stone panels, revealing long streaks of black residue running down the walls. Water damage? Rowan asked quietly. Belle shook his head slowly. That's not water. Rowan shined her flashlight closer. The streaks weren't uniform. They looked like something had been dragged downward repeatedly, over many years. She forced herself to keep climbing. The first landing. After 3 flights, they reached a circular landing. Old equipment rooms lined the walls, doors hanging crookedly from rusted hinges. Rowan pushed one open cautiously. Inside sat what remained of the lighthouse generator room. Or what had been the generator room. The floor was covered in stripped wires, shattered battery casings, and mechanical components removed decades ago. The metal housing where the generator once sat was hollow, empty except for thick dust and bird nests. Bell crossed his arms. County removed everything in '84, he said. Made sure nobody could ever restart the light. Rowan slowly turned in place, scanning the room. Then why does it still feel operational? Bell didn't answer. Because it did. Despite the decay, despite the absence of machinery, there was a low humming vibration pulsing faintly through the floor beneath their feet. Not loud, not mechanical, almost organic. Rowan crouched, pressing her palm against the cold metal floor. She felt it clearly now. A slow, rhythmic vibration, like a heartbeat. The walls. Bell's flashlight caught something scratched into the wall beside the doorway. Rowan stepped closer. Lines. Hundreds of them. Vertical tally marks carved deeply into the stone, stacked in uneven clusters that filled the entire wall surface. Those weren't here before, Bell muttered. Rowan counted quickly. Rows and rows of them. Far too many to be simple maintenance logs. These aren't tallies, she said quietly. They're days. Bell's jaw tightened. You're saying someone lived up here? Rowan nodded slowly. For a very long time. The keeper's quarters. They continued climbing. The storm outside roared louder as they ascended, wind howling through cracked windows and broken stone vents. The staircase narrowed slightly, forcing them closer to the inner wall. Another landing appeared above them. Bell hesitated when he saw the door there. It was different from the others. Reinforced. Locked from the outside with a heavy chain, though the padlock hung broken and twisted as if it had been torn apart by force. Rowan exchanged a glance with Bell before pushing the door open. The room inside was disturbingly preserved. This had once been the lighthouse keeper's living quarters. A narrow bed still sat against one wall, its mattress collapsed but intact. A small wooden desk stood near a shattered window, papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Rowan stepped carefully inside. Everything smelled stale, untouched. Except for one thing. The bed. The blanket was folded neatly. Too neatly. Like someone had done it recently. The hidden drawer. Bell moved toward the desk, sweeping debris aside. The drawer was jammed, but after a firm tug, it slid open with a metallic screech. Inside sat several weathered notebooks tied together with twine. Rowan immediately recognized the handwriting when she opened the first one. Daniel Cross, the final lighthouse keeper. She flipped to a marked page. Day 19. The light activated again tonight. I shut down every remaining system. Still it rotates. Still it calls. I hear movement below the stairs when the beam passes over the ocean. Rowan turned another page. Day 27. I found scratches appearing on the inner walls. I did not make them. I am certain of this. Another page. Day 31. The spiral appeared today, painted on the inside of the lantern room glass. I scrubbed it away. It returned within minutes. Rowan felt her stomach tighten. Bell leaned closer as she turned to the final entry. Day 42. The voice is louder now. It says the light does not guide ships. It guides offerings. I locked the lantern room door. If someone finds this, do not let the light complete its full rotation during a storm. Rowan froze. Bell read over her shoulder. Complete rotation? He asked. Rowan looked up toward the tower ceiling where the beam continued to sweep overhead. How long is a full cycle? She asked. Bell checked his watch. Roughly every 90 seconds. Rowan's voice dropped. Then we don't have much time. The moving light. Suddenly, the beam overhead stuttered. Once. Twice. Then it slowed. The rotation dragging unnaturally, as if something heavy resisted it from above. The girl's voice echoed again. Closer this time. Help me, it's dark up here. Bell grabbed his radio. Dispatch, do you copy? Only static answered. Rowan grabbed her flashlight tighter. We need to reach the lantern room now. The upper spiral. The final staircase section was steeper, narrower, and dangerously unstable. Sections of railing had completely rusted away, leaving only open air between them and the hollow tower core. The humming vibration beneath their feet grew stronger with each step. The light overhead flickered violently now. Flash. Darkness. Flash again. Rowan's breathing became shallow. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving inside the tower walls alongside them, climbing with them. The lantern room door. At last, they reached the final landing. The lantern room door stood directly ahead, thick glass panels set into an iron frame, reinforced with internal locking bars. Except, the bars were bent outward. From the inside, Belle cursed softly. That's not possible. Rowan stepped closer. Through the cracked glass, she could see the enormous lighthouse lens rotating slowly, a massive multi-panel Fresnel lens that should have weighed thousands of pounds. It spun effortlessly, without gears, without motors, without sound, and inside the lantern room, someone stood near the center. A silhouette, small, still. Rowan's voice cracked. Lila? The silhouette shifted slightly. The lighthouse beam passed across the glass again, illuminating the figure clearly. It was Lila Grant, her face pale, eyes wide, but something was wrong. She wasn't looking at them. She was staring directly into the rotating lens, like she was mesmerized. The secret beneath the lens. Rowan shoved the lantern door open. The wind howled violently inside the glass chamber, swirling salt spray and dust into a chaotic storm around the rotating lens. Lila! Rowan shouted, rushing forward. The girl didn't respond. Belle grabbed her shoulder, trying to pull her away from the lens. The moment he touched her, the floor beneath the lens shifted. A hidden hatch slid open with